Chapter 10. The moon was just rising as the Viscount, followed by the faithful Pompey, left Master Biscaro's hostelry behind him and started off on the road to Paris. After about quarter of an hour, which the Viscount devoted to his reflections, and during which they made something like a league and a half, he turned to the squire, who was gravely bobbing up and down in his saddle, 3 paces behind his master. "Pompey," the young man asked, "have you my right glove by any chance?" "Not that I am aware of, monsieur," said Pompey. "What are you doing to your portmanteau, pray?" "I am looking to see if it is fastened on securely, and tightening the straps, for fear the gold may rattle. The rattle of gold is a fatal thing, monsieur, and leads to unpleasant meetings, especially at night. It's well done of you, Pompey, and I love to see that you are so prudent and careful. Those are very natural qualities in an old soldier, monsieur le Vicomte, and are well adapted to go with courage. However, as rashness is not courage, I confess my regret that Monsieur Rickhan couldn't come with us, for 20,000 livres is a risky burden, especially in such stormy times as these." "What you say is full of common sense, Pompey, and I agree with you in every point," the Viscount replied. "I will even venture to say," continued Pompey, emboldened in his fear by the Viscount's approbation, "that it is imprudent to take the chances we are taking. Let us halt a moment, if you please, while I inspect my musket. Well, Pompey, it seems to be in good condition, and the man who undertakes to stop us will have a bad quarter of an hour. Oh ho! What I see yonder." "Where?" "100 yards ahead of us. To the right. Look, over there." "I see something white." "Yes, yes," said Pompey. "White. A crossbelt, perhaps. I am very anxious, on my honor, to get behind that hedge on the left. In military language that is called entrenching. Let us entrench ourselves, Monsieur le Vicomte. If those are crossbelts, Pompey, they are worn by the king's soldiers, and the king's soldiers don't rob peaceful travelers. Don't you believe it, Monsieur le Vicomte? Don't you believe it? On the contrary, we hear of nothing but road agents, who use His Majesty's uniform as a cloak under which to commit innumerable villanies, each one more damnable than the last. And lately at Bordeaux, 2 of the light horse were broken on the wheel. I think I recognize the uniform of the light horse, monsieur. Their uniform is blue, Pompey, and what we see is white. True, but they often put on a blouse over their uniform. That's what the villains did who were recently broken on the wheel at Bordeaux. It seems to me that they are gesticulating a great deal. They are threatening. That's their tactics, you see, Monsieur le Comte. They lie in ambush like this by the road, and, carbine in hand, compel the traveler to throw his purse to them from a distance. "But, my good Pompey," said the Viscount, who, although considerably alarmed, kept his presence of mind, "if they threaten from a distance with their carbines, do the same with yours." "Yes, but they don't see me," said Pompey, "so any demonstration on my part would be useless." "Well, if they don't see you, they can hardly be threatening you, I should say." "You understand absolutely nothing of war," retorted the squire, ill-humoredly. "The same thing is going to happen to me here that happened at Corbie. Let us hope not, Pompey, for, if I remember right, Corbie is where you were wounded." "Yes, and a terrible wound. I was with Monsieur de Cams, and a rash gentleman he was. We were doing patrol duty one night, to investigate the place where the battle was to be fought. We spied some crossbelts. I urged him not to do a foolhardy thing that would do no good. He persisted and marched straight up to the crossbelts. I turned my back angrily. At that moment, a curse ball, "Viscount, let us be prudent." "Prudent we will be, Pompey. I ask nothing better. But it seems to me that they do not move. They are scenting their prey. Wait." The travelers, luckily for them, had not to wait long. In a moment the moon shone out from behind a black cloud, and cast a bright light upon 2 or 3 shirts drying behind a hedge, with sleeves outstretched some 50 paces away. They were the cross-belts which reminded Pompey of his ill-fated patrol at Corbie. The Viscount laughed heartily and spurred his horse. Pompey followed him, crying, "How fortunate that I did not follow my first impulse. I was going to send a ball in that direction, and it would have made me a second Don Quixote. You see, Viscount, the value of prudence and experience in warfare." After a period of deep emotion, There's always a period of repose. Having safely passed the shirts, the travelers rode on 2 or 3 leagues peacefully enough. It was a superb night. A clump of trees by the roadside made a broad shadow, black as ebony, across the road. "I most assuredly do not like the moonlight," said Pompey. "When you can be seen from a distance, you run the risk of being taken by surprise. I have always heard men versed in war say that of 2 men who are looking for each other, the moon never helps but one at a time. We are in the bright light, Monsieur le Vicomte, and it isn't prudent." "Very well, let us ride in the shadow, Pompey." "Yes, but if men were lying hidden in the edge of the wood, we should literally run into their mouths. In wartime, you never approach a wood until it has been reconnoitered." "Unfortunately," rejoined the Viscount, "we lack scouts. Isn't that what they call the men who reconnoiter woods? Brave Pompey." "Yes, yes," muttered the squire. "Deuce take Rick Hahn. Why didn't he come? We could have sent him forward as advance guard while we formed the main body of the army." "Well, Pompey, what shall we do? Shall we stay in the moonlight or go over into the shadow?" "Let us get into the shadow, Monsieur le Vicomte. It's the most prudent way, I think." "Shadow it is. You are afraid, Monsieur le Vicomte, aren't you?" "No, my dear Pompey, I swear I'm not." "You would be foolish, for I am here and on the watch. If I were alone, you understand, this would trouble me very little. An old soldier fears neither God nor devil. But you are a companion as hard to watch as the gold I have on behind, and the double responsibility alarms me. Ah, what is that black form I see over there? This time it is moving." "There's no doubt about that," said the Viscount. "See what it is to be in the shadow. We see the enemy, and he doesn't see us. Doesn't it seem to you as if the villain has a musket?" "Yes, but he's alone, Pompey, and there are 2 of us." "Monsieur le Vicomte, men who travel alone are most to be feared, for their being alone indicates a determined character. The famous Baron d'Adres always went by himself. Look, he's aiming at us, or I'm much mistaken. He has got a fire. Stoop?" "Why? No, Pompey. He's simply changing his musket from one shoulder to the other." "Never mind. We must stoop all the same. It's the custom. Let us receive his fire with our noses on our saddles." "But you see that he doesn't fire, Pompey." "He doesn't fire," said the squire, raising his head. "Good. He must be afraid. Our determined bearing has intimidated him." "Ah, he's afraid. Let me speak to him. And do you speak after me, and make your voice as gruff as possible." The shadow was coming toward them. "Ho! Friend, who are you?" cried Pompey. The shadow halted with a very perceptible start of terror. "Do you shout now?" said Pompey. "It's useless," said the Viscount. "The poor devil is frightened enough already." "Ah, he's afraid," said Pompey, raising his weapon. "Mercy, monsieur!" exclaimed the man, falling on his knees. "Mercy! I am only a poor peddler, and I haven't sold as much as a pocket handkerchief for a week. I haven't a sou about me." What Pompey had taken for a musket was a yardstick with which the poor devil measured off his wares. "Pray understand, my friend," said Pompey majestically, "that we are no thieves, but fighting men, traveling at night because we are afraid of nothing. Go your way in peace. You are free." "Here, my friend," the milder voice of the Viscount interposed, "here's a half-pistole for the fright we gave you, and may God be with you." As he spoke, the Viscount, with his small white hand, gave the poor devil a half-pistole, and he walked away, thanking heaven for the lucky meeting. "You were wrong, Monsieur le Vicomte. You were very wrong," said Pompey, a few steps farther on. "Wrong, wrong. Wherein, pray?" "In giving that man a half-pistole. At night, you should never admit that you have money about you. Look you, wasn't it that coward's first cry that he hadn't a sou?" "True," said the Viscount, smiling. "But he's a coward, as you say, while we, as you also said, are fighting men who fear nothing. Between being afraid and being suspicious, Monsieur le Vicomte, there is as great a distance as between fear and prudence. Now, it isn't prudent, I say again, to let a stranger whom you meet on the high road see that you have money. Not when the stranger is alone and unarmed. He may belong to an armed band. He may be only a spy sent forward to see how the land lies. He may return with crowd, and what can two men, however brave they may be, do against a crowd? This time the Viscount realized the reasonableness of Pompey's reproof, or rather, to cut the lecture short, pretended to admit his guilt, and they rode on until they reached the bank of the little river Say, near St. Jean's. There was no bridge, and they were obliged to ford the stream. Pompey, thereupon, delivered a learned discourse upon the passage of rivers. But as a discourse is not a bridge, they were not the less obliged to ford the stream after the discourse was concluded. Fortunately, the river was not deep, and this latest incident afforded the Viscount further proof that things seen at a distance, especially at night, are much more alarming than when seen at close quarters. He was really beginning, therefore, to feel safe, especially as the day would break in about another hour, when, as they were in the midst of the wood which lies about Marses, the two travelers suddenly drew rein. They could hear, far in their rear, but distinctly, the hoof-beats of galloping horses. At the same moment their own horses raised their heads, and one of them neighed. "This time," said Pompey, in a stifled voice, seizing the bridle of his companion's horse, "this time, Monsieur le Vicomte, you will show a little docility, I trust, and be guided by the experience of an old soldier. I hear a troop of mounted men. They are pursuing us. Of course it's your pretended peddler's band. I told you so, imprudent youth that you are. Come, no useless bravado, but let us save our lives and our money. Flight is often a means of winning the battle. Horace pretended to fly." "Very well, let us fly, Pompey," said the Viscount, trembling from head to foot. Pompey drove in his spurs. His horse, an excellent roan, leaped forward with zeal that inflamed the ardor of the Viscount's barb, and they dashed away at full speed, followed by a train of sparks, as their iron-shod hoofs flew along the hard road. This race lasted about half an hour, but instead of gaining ground, it seemed to the fugitives that their enemies were coming nearer. Suddenly a voice issued from the darkness, a voice which, mingling with the hissing sound produced by the speed at which they were riding, seemed like the muttered menace of the spirits of the night. It made the gray hair stand erect on Pompey's head. "They cried, 'Stop!'" he muttered. "They cried, 'Stop!' Well, shall we stop?" asked the Viscount. "By no means," cried Pompey. "Let us double our speed, if possible. Forward, forward. Yes, yes, forward, forward," cried the Viscount, as thoroughly terrified now as his defender. They are gaining," said Pompey. "Do you hear them?" "Alas, yes." "They are not more than 30. Listen, they are calling us again. We are lost. Founder the horses, if we must," said the Viscount, more dead than alive. "Viscount, Viscount," shouted the voice. "Stop, stop, stop, old Pompey. It is someone who knows us, someone who knows we are carrying money to Madame la Princesse, someone who knows we are conspirators. We shall be broken on the wheel alive." "Stop, stop," the voice persisted. "They are shouting to someone to stop us," said Pompey. "They have someone ahead of us. We are surrounded. Suppose we turn into the field and let them pass?" "A good idea," said Pompey. "Let us try it." They guided their horses with rein and knee at the same time, and turned to the left. The Viscount's mount, skillfully handled, leaped the ditch, but Pompey's heavier beast took off too late. The ground gave way under his feet, and he fell, carrying his rider down with him. The squire emitted a shriek of despair. The Viscount, who was already 50 paces away, heard his cry of distress, and although sadly frightened himself, turned and rode back to his companion. "Mercy," howled Pompey. "Ransom. I surrender. I belong to the House of Cams." A loud shout of laughter was the only response to this pitiful appeal, and the Viscount, riding up at that moment, saw Pompey embracing the stirrup of the conqueror, who, in a voice choking with laughter, was trying to reassure him. "Monsieur le Baron de Canoles!" exclaimed the Viscount. Sarpejou. "Yes, go to Viscount. It isn't fair to lead people who are looking for you such a race as this." "Monsieur le Baron de Canoles," echoed Pompey, still doubting his good luck. "Monsieur le Baron Canoles and Monsieur Castorin." "Why, yes, Monsieur Pompey," said Castorin, rising in his stirrups to look over his master's shoulder, as he bent forward, laughing, over his saddle-bow. "What are you doing in that ditch?" "You see," said Pompey. My horse fell just as I was about to entrench myself, taking you for enemies, in order to make a vigorous defense. Monsieur le Vicomte, he continued, rising and shaking himself. It's Monsieur de Canoles. You hear, monsieur, murmured the Viscount, with something very like joy, which was reflected in his tone in spite of himself. Faith! Yes, it's myself, replied Canoles, gazing at the Viscount with a degree of pertinacity which his finding of the glove sufficiently explained. I was bored to death in that inn. Rickon left me after winning my money. I learned that you had taken the Paris road. Luckily, I had business in the same direction. So I set out to overtake you. I didn't suspect that I should have to run such a race to do it. Peste, my young gentleman, what a horseman you are. The Viscount smiled and stammered a few words. Castorin, continued Canoles, assist Monsieur Pompey to mount. You see that he can't quite manage it, notwithstanding his skill. Castorin dismounted and lent a hand to Pompey, who finally regained his seat. Now, said the Viscount, we will ride on by your leave. One moment, said Pompey, much embarrassed. One moment, Monsieur le Vicomte. It seems to me that I missed something. I should say as much, said the Viscount. You missed the valise. Oh, mon Dieu, ejaculated Pompey, feigning profound astonishment. Wretch, cried the Viscount. Can you have lost it? It can't be far away, monsieur, Pompey replied. Isn't this it? Inquired Castorin, picking up the object in question, which he found some difficulty in lifting. It is, said the Viscount. It is, echoed Pompey. It isn't his fault, said Canoles, anxious to make a friend of the old squire. In his fall, the straps broke and the valise fell off. The straps are not broken, monsieur, but cut, said Castorin. Look. Oh, Monsieur Pompey, said Canoles. What does that mean? It means, said the Viscount sternly, that, in his terror at being pursued by robbers, Monsieur Pompey cleverly cut the straps of the valise so that he might not have the responsibility of being the treasurer. In military parlance, what is that ruse called, Monsieur Pompey? Pompey tried to excuse himself by putting the blame on his hunting knife, which he had imprudently drawn. But, as he could give no satisfactory explanation, he remained under the suspicion, in the Viscount's eyes, of having chosen to sacrifice the valise to his own safety. Canoles was more lenient. Nonsense, said he. That may or may not be. But strap the valise on again. Come, Castorin, help Monsieur Pompey. You were right, Master Pompey, to be afraid of robbers. The valise is heavy and would be a valuable prize. Don't joke, monsieur, said Pompey with a shudder. All joking is equivocal at night. You are right, Pompey, always right. And so I propose to act as escort to you and the Viscount. A reinforcement of 2 men may be of some use to you. Yes, indeed, cried Pompey. There is safety in numbers. What say you to my offer, Viscount? Said Canoles, who observed that the Viscount welcomed his obliging suggestion with less enthusiasm than the squire. Aye, monsieur, was the reply. Recognize therein your usual desire to oblige, and I thank you very sincerely, but our roads are not the same, and I should dislike to put you to inconvenience. What? Said Canoles, greatly disappointed to find that the struggle at the inn was to begin again in the high road. What? Our roads are not the same? Aren't you going to? Chantilly, said Pompey, hastily, trembling at the thought of pursuing his journey with no other companion than the Viscount. That gentleman made an impatient gesture, and if it had been daylight, an angry flush might have been seen to mount to his cheeks. Why, cried Canoles, without seeming to notice the furious glance with which the Viscount blasted poor Pompey. Why, Chantilly lies directly in my way. I am going to Paris, or rather, he added with a laugh, I have no business, my dear Viscount, and I don't know where I am going. Are you going to Paris? So am I. Are you going to Lyons? I am going to Lyons. Are you going to Marseilles? I have long had a passionate desire to see Provence, and I am going to Marseilles. Are you going to Stenay, where His Majesty's troops are? Let us go to Stenay together. Though born in the south, I have always had a predilection for the north. Monsieur, rejoined the Viscount, in a determined tone, due doubtless to his irritation against Pompey. "You force me to remind you that I am traveling alone on private business of the utmost importance. And forgive me, but if you insist, you will compel me, to my great regret, to tell you that you annoy me." Nothing less than the thought of the little glove, which lay hidden upon his breast between his shirt and doublet, would have restrained the Baron, who was as quick-tempered and impulsive as any Gascon, from an outburst of wrath. However, he did succeed in controlling himself. "Monsieur," he replied in a more serious tone, "I have never heard it said that the high road belonged to one person more than to another. Indeed, if I mistake not, it is called the King's Road, as an indication that all His Majesty's subjects have an equal right to use it. I am, therefore, upon the King's Road with no purpose of annoying you. Indeed, I am here to make myself useful to you, for you are young, weak, and practically undefended. I did not suppose that I looked like a highwayman. But since you so imply, I must needs admit my unprepossessing appearance. Forgive my intrusion, monsieur. I have the honor of presenting my respects to you. Bon voyage." With that, Canolles, having saluted the Viscount, rode to the other side of the road, followed by Castoren in the flesh and by Pompey in spirit. Canolles acted throughout this scene with such perfect courtesy, his gestures were so graceful, the brow which his broad felt had shaded was so unruffled, and surrounded by such silky black hair, that the Viscount was even less impressed by his words than by his lofty bearing. He had moved away, as we have said, followed by Castoren, sitting stiff and straight in his saddle. Pompey, who remained with the Viscount, sighed in a heart-rending way, fit to break the hearts of the stones in the road. Thereupon the Viscount, having duly reflected, urged his horse forward, joined Canolles, who pretended not to see or hear him, and whispered in an almost inaudible voice, "Monsieur de Canolles." Canolles started and turned his head. A thrill of pleasure ran through his veins. It seemed to him as if all the music of the heavenly spheres were taking part in a divine concert for his benefit alone. "Viscount," said he. "Listen, monsieur," continued the Viscount, in a soft, sweet voice. "Really I am distressed at the thought of being guilty of any discourtesy to one so courteous and obliging as yourself. Forgive my timidity, I pray you. I was brought up by relatives whose affection for me made them reluctant to let me out of their sight. I ask you once more, therefore, to forgive me. I have not intended to offend you, and I trust you will permit me to ride beside you, as a proof of our sincere reconciliation." "Marry, that I will," cried Canolles, "100 and 1,000 times, yes. I bear no malice, Viscount, and to prove it." He put out his hand, into which fell or slipped a little hand, as soft and shrinking as a sparrow's claw. During the rest of the night the Baron talked incessantly. The Viscount listened and laughed now and then. The two servants rode behind, Pompey explaining to Castoren how the Battle of Corbie was lost, when it might perfectly well have been won, if they had not neglected to summon him to the council of war held in the morning. "But how did you get out of your affair with Monsieur d'Epernon?" said the Viscount, as the first rays of daylight appeared. "It was no difficult matter," Canolles replied. "According to what you told me, Viscount, it was he who had business with me, not I with him. Either he got tired of waiting for me and went his way, or he was obstinate about it and is waiting still." "But what of Mademoiselle de Lartigues?" queried the Viscount with some hesitation. "Mademoiselle de Lartigues cannot be at home with Monsieur d'Epernon, and at the Golden Calf with me at one and the same time. We mustn't ask a woman to do the impossible." "That is no answer, Baron. I ask you how it is that you could bear to leave Mademoiselle de Lartigues, being so fond of her as you are." Canolles gazed at the Viscount with eyes which already saw too clearly, for it was quite light by this time, and there was no other shadow on the young man's face than that cast by his hat. The Baron felt a mad impulse to reply by speaking his thoughts, but the presence of Pompey and Castoren and the Viscount's serious expression held him back. Moreover, he was not yet absolutely free from doubt. "Suppose that I am mistaken, and that it should prove to be a man, despite the little glove and little hand. Upon my soul, I never should dare look him in the face again." He took patience, therefore, and answered the Viscount's question with one of those smiles which serve to answer any question. They stopped at Barbezieux for breakfast and to breathe their horses. Canolles breakfasted with the Viscount, and as they sat at table gazed admiringly at the hand whose perfumed envelope had caused him such lively emotion. Furthermore, The Viscount was bound in common courtesy to remove his hat before taking a seat, and as he did so, he disclosed such a wealth of lovely, soft hair that any other than a man in love and consequently blind would have been relieved of all uncertainty. But Knowles dreaded the awakening too keenly not to prolong the dream as much as possible. There was something fascinating to him in the Viscount's disguise, which permitted him to indulge in a multitude of little familiarities which a more thorough acquaintance or a complete confession would have forbidden. He therefore said not a word to lead the Viscount to think that his incognito was detected. After breakfast, they resumed their journey and rode until dinner. Gradually, a feeling of weariness, which he found more and more difficulty in concealing, caused a haggard look to appear on the Viscount's face, and a slight shivering of his whole body, of which Knowles in a friendly way asked him the cause. Thereupon Monsieur de Cams would smile and pretend that the feeling had passed away, and even suggest quickening their pace, which Knowles refused to do, saying that they had a long distance still to travel, and that they must therefore spare their horses. After dinner, the Viscount found some difficulty in rising. Knowles darted to his assistance. "You need rest, my young friend," said he. "A continuous journey like this would kill you before you finish the third stage. We will not ride tonight, but go to bed. I propose that you shall have a good night's sleep, and may I die if the best room in the inn is not given you." The Viscount looked at Pompey with such an expression of terror that Knowles could not conquer his desire to laugh. "When we undertake so long a journey," said Pompey, "we ought each to have a tent." "Or one tent for two," observed Knowles with a most natural air. "That would be quite enough." The Viscount shivered from head to foot. The blow struck home, and Knowles saw that it did. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that the Viscount made a sign to Pompey. Pompey went to his master's side, who said a few words to him in an undertone, and a moment later the old squire, muttering some excuse, rode on ahead and disappeared. An hour and a half after this incident, which Knowles did not seek to have explained, as they rode into a considerable village, the two travelers spied the squire standing in the doorway of a hostelry of decent appearance. "Aha!" said Knowles. "It would seem that we are past the night here, Viscount?" "Why, yes, Baron, if you choose." "Nonsense. It is for you to choose. As I told you, I am traveling for pleasure, while you tell me that you are traveling on business. I'm afraid that you won't fare very well in this hovel." "Oh, a night is soon past." They halted, and Pompey, more alert than Knowles, darted forward and took his master's stirrup. Moreover, it occurred to Knowles that such an attention would be absurd from one man to another. "Show me to my room at once," said the Viscount. "In truth, you are right, Monsieur de Knowles," he continued, turned to his companion. "I am really extremely fatigued." "Here it is, monsieur," said the hostess, throwing open the door of a good-sized room on the ground floor, looking on the courtyard, but with bars at the windows and nothing but the garret above. "Where is mine, pray?" cried Knowles, casting his eyes cautiously at the door next the Viscount's, and at the thin partition, which would have been very slender protection against a curiosity so thoroughly sharpened as his. "Yours," said the hostess. "Come this way, monsieur, and I'll take you to it." Without apparently noticing Knowles' ill humor, she led him to the farther end of an exterior corridor, lavishly supplied with doors, and separated from the Viscount's room by the width of the courtyard. The Viscount stood at his door looking after them. "Now," said Knowles, "I am sure of my fact, but I have acted like a fool. To put a bad face on the matter would ruin me irretrievably. I must assume my most gracious air." He went out again upon the sort of gallery formed by the exterior corridor and cried, "Good night, my dear Viscount. Sleep well. You sadly need it. Shall I wake you in the morning? No? Very well. Then do you wake me when you choose. Good night." "Good night, Baron." "By the way," continued Knowles, "is there nothing you lack? Shall I lend you Castorin to wait upon you?" "Thanks. I have Pompey. He sleeps in the next room." "A wise precaution. I will see that Castorin does the same." "A prudent measure, Pompey? One can't take too many precautions at an inn. Good night, Viscount." The Viscount replied by echoing the compliment and closed his door. Very good, Viscount," murmured Knowles. "Tomorrow will be my turn to engage quarters of night, and I'll have my revenge." "Aha! He pulls both curtains close at his window. He hangs up a cloth to intercept his shadow. Pest. A very modest youth is this little gentleman. But it's all the same. Tomorrow, Knowles entered his room grumbling, undressed in high dudgeon, went to sleep swearing, and dreamed that Nanon found the Viscount's pearl-gray glove in his pocket. Chapter 11. The next morning, Knowles was in even more jovial humor than on preceding day. The Vicomte de Cams, too, gave freer rein to his natural animation. Even the dignified Pompey became almost playful in describing his campaigns to Castorin. The whole morning passed in pleasant conversation. At breakfast, Knowles apologized for leaving the Viscount, but he had, he said, a long letter to write to one of his friends who lived in the neighborhood, and he told him also that he intended to call upon another friend of his, whose house was situated 3 or 4 leagues beyond Poitiers, almost on the high road. Knowles inquired about this last-named friend, whose name he mentioned to the innkeeper, and was told that he would find his house just before reaching the village of Jaulnay, and could easily identify it by its 2 towers. Thereupon, as Castorin was to leave the party to deliver the letter, and as Knowles too was to make a detour, the Viscount was asked to decide where they should pass the night. He glanced at a little map which Pompey carried in the case, and suggested the village of Jaulnay. Knowles made no objection, and even carried his perfidy so far as to say aloud, "Pompey, if you are sent on before his quartermaster, as you were yesterday, secure a room for me, if possible, near your master's, so that we may talk together a little." The crafty squire exchanged a glance with the Viscount and smiled, fully determined to do nothing of the sort. Castorin, meanwhile, who had received his instructions beforehand, took the letter and was told to join the rest of the party at Jaulnay. There was no danger mistaking the inn, as Jaulnay could boast but one, the Grand Charles Martel. The horses were saddled, and they set out. About 500 yards beyond Poitiers, where they dined, Castorin took a crossroad to the right. They rode on for about 2 hours. At last they came to a house, which Knowles, from the description given him, recognized as his friend's. He pointed it out to the Viscount, repeated his request to Pompey as to the location of his room, and took a crossroad to the left. The Viscount was entirely reassured. His maneuver the previous evening had been successful without a contest, and the whole day had passed without the slightest allusion to it. He no longer feared that Knowles would place any obstacle in the way of his wishes, and as soon as he saw in the Baron nothing more than a kindly, jovial, witty traveling companion, he desired nothing better than to finish the journey in his company. And so, whether because the Viscount deemed it a useless precaution, or because he did not wish to part company with his squire, and remain alone in the high road, Pompey was not even sent on ahead. They reached the village at nightfall. The rain was falling in torrents. As good luck would have it, there was a vacant room with a good fire. The Viscount, who was in haste to change his clothes, took it, and sent Pompey to engage a room for Knowles. "It is already done," said Pompey the selfish, who was beyond measure anxious to go to bed himself. "The hostess has agreed to look out for him. Tea as well. My toilet case. Here it is. And my bottles? Here they are. Thanks. Where you sleep, Pompey? At the end of the corridor. Suppose I need you? Here is a bell. The hostess will come. That will do. The door has a good lock, has it not? Monsieur can see for himself. There are no bolts. No, but there's a stout lock. Good. I will lock myself in. There's no other entrance. None that I know of." Pompey took the candle and made the circuit of the room. "See if the shutters are secure." "They are all hooked." "Very well. You may go, Pompey." Pompey went out, and the Viscount turned the key in the lock. An hour later, Castorin, who had arrived first at the inn and was quartered near Pompey, without his knowledge, left his room on tiptoe and opened the door to admit Knowles. Knowles, with beating heart, glided into the inn, and leaving Castorin to secure the door, inquired the location of the Viscount's room and went upstairs. The Viscount was just about to retire when he heard footsteps in the corridor. The Viscount, as we have seen, was very timid. The footsteps startled him, and he listened with all his ears. The footsteps stopped at his door. An instant later, someone knocked. "Who's there?" inquired a voice, with such a terrified accent that Knowles could not have recognized it, had he not already had occasion to study all its variations. "I," said Knowles. "What? You?" rejoined the voice, passing from terror to dismay. "Yes. Fancy, Viscount, that there's not a single unoccupied room in the inn. Your idiot of a Pompey didn't think of me. Not another in the whole village. And as your room has 2 beds." The Viscount glanced in dismay at the 2 twin beds standing side by side in an alcove and separated only by a table. "Well, do you understand?" continued Knowles. "I claim one of them. Open the door quickly, I beg, for I am dead with cold." At that there was a great commotion inside the room, the rustling of clothes and hurried steps. "Yes, yes, Baron," said the Viscount's voice, more dismayed than ever. "Yes, I am coming. I am waiting. But in pity's name make haste, dear friend, if you don't wish to find me frozen stiff. Forgive me, but I was asleep, you see." "What?" "I thought I saw a light." "No, you were mistaken." And the light was at once extinguished. Knowles made no complaint. "I am here. I can't find the door," the Viscount continued. "I should think not," said Knowles. "I hear your voice at the other end of the room. This way, this way." "Oh." "I am looking for the bell to call Pompey. Pompey is at the other end of the corridor and will not hear you. I tried to wake him to find out something, but tea was impossible. He is sleeping like the deaf idiot he is. Then I will call the hostess." "Nonsense. The hostess has given up her bed to one of her guests and has gone to the attic to sleep. So no one will come, my dear friend. After all, why call anybody? I need no assistance. But do you open the door and I will thank you. I will feel my way to the bed, turn in, and that's the whole of it. Open the door, I beg." "But there must be other rooms," said the Viscount in despair, "even if they are without beds. It's impossible that there are no other rooms. Let us call and inquire. But it's after 10:30, my dear Viscount. You will rouse the whole establishment. They will think the house is on fire. The result would be to keep everybody awake all night, and I am dying for want of sleep." These last words seemed to reassure the Viscount to some extent. Light steps approached the door, and it was softly opened. Knowles entered and locked the door behind him. The Viscount had fled precipitately. The Baron found himself in almost total darkness, for the last embers of the fire, which was dying out, gave out but a feeble flickering light. The atmosphere was warm and heavy with the perfumes which denote the most assiduous attention to the toilet. "Ah, thanks, Viscount," said Knowles. "In truth, one is much more comfortable here than in the corridor. You're anxious to go to sleep, Baron?" "Yes, most assuredly." "Tell me which is my bed, or let me light the candle." "No, no, it's useless," said the Viscount hastily. "Your bed is here at the left." As the Viscount's left was the Baron's right, the Baron turned to the left, fell in with a window. Near the window a small table, and upon the table the bell which the agitated Viscount had sought in vain. To make assurance doubly sure, he put the bell in his pocket. "What did you say?" he cried. "Are we playing at blind man's buff? You ought at least to cry Cascou. What the devil are you fumbling for there in the dark?" "I am looking for the bell, to call Pompey." "But what the devil do you want of Pompey?" I want him to make up a bed beside mine." "For whom?" "For himself." "For himself. What are you talking about? Viscount? Servants in our room. Go to. You act like a frightened girl. Fie, fie. We are old enough to defend ourselves. No, just give me your hand and guide me to my bed, which I cannot find, or else let us light the candle." "No, no, no," cried the Viscount. "If you won't give me your hand, you ought at least to pass me the end of thread, for I am in a veritable labyrinth." He walked with arms outstretched in the direction from which the voice came, but he saw something like a shadow flit by him, accompanied by a wave of sweetest perfume. He closed his arms, but, like Virgil's Orpheus, embraced nothing but air. "There, there," said the Viscount at the other end of the room. "You are close beside your bed, Baron." "Which of the two is mine?" "It matters little. I shall not go to bed." "What's that? You won't go to bed?" exclaimed Knowles, turning about at this imprudent speech. "What will you do, pray?" I shall pass the night on a chair. Nonsense, said Knowles. I certainly shall not allow any such child's play. Come, Viscount, come. As the fire on the hearth blazed up for an instant before dying altogether, Knowles caught sight of the Viscount crouching in a corner between the window and the commode, wrapped in his cloak. The blaze was no more than a flash, but it was sufficient to guide the Baron and to make the Viscount understand that he was lost. Knowles walked straight toward her with arms outstretched, and although the room was dark once more, the poor fellow realized that he could not again elude his pursuer. Baron, Baron, he faltered. Come no nearer, I implore you, not a step nearer. If you are a gentleman. Knowles stopped. The Viscount was so near him that he could hear his heart beat and could feel his warm breath coming in gasps. At the same time, a delicious, intoxicating perfume, a blending of all the perfumes which emanate from youth and beauty, a perfume 10,000 times sweeter than that of the sweetest flowers, seemed to envelop him and make it impossible for him to obey the Viscount, even had he desired to do so. However, he stood for an instant where he was, his hands stretched out toward those other hands, which were ready to repulse him, and with the feeling that he had but to take one step more to touch that charming body, whose suppleness and grace he had so much admired during the last 2 days. Mercy, mercy, murmured the Viscount. Mercy! His voice died away upon his lips, and Knowles felt his body glide by the curtains of the window and fall at his feet. His breast dilated. There was a something in the imploring voice that told him that his adversary was half vanquished. He stepped forward, put out his hands, and met the young man's clasped in supplication. He had not the strength to cry out, but heaved a pitiful sigh. Suddenly the galloping of a horse was heard beneath the window. There was a hurried knocking at the door, followed by a great outcry. Le Baron de Knowles, a voice shouted. Ah, God, I thank thee. I am saved, murmured the Viscount. The devil take the beast, exclaimed Knowles. Couldn't he have waited until tomorrow morning? Le Baron de Knowles, cried the voice. Le Baron de Knowles. I must speak with him on the instant. Well, what's the matter? Said the Baron, stepping toward the window. Monsieur, called Castoren at the door. They are asking for you. You are wanted. But who is it, varlet? A courier. From whom? Le Duc d'Epernon. What does he want with me? The king's service. At that magic phrase, which it was impossible not to heed, Knowles, still grumbling, opened the door and went downstairs. Pompey's snoring could be distinctly heard. The courier had entered the inn and was waiting below. Knowles joined him and turned pale as he read Nanon's letter. For, as the reader will have guessed, the courier was Cavaignac himself, who, having started nearly 10 hours after Knowles, was unable to overtake him before the second night, ride as hard as he might. Cavaignac's answers to his questions left Knowles in no doubt as to the necessity of losing no time. He read the letter a second time, and the phrase, your loving sister, Nanon, told him what had happened. That is to say, that Mademoiselle had cleared her skirts by passing him off as her brother. Knowles had frequently heard Nanon herself speak in most unflattering terms of his brother, whose place he had taken. This fact added not a little to the ill grace with which he prepared to obey the Duke's behest. "'Tis is well," said Cavaignac, without opening a credit for him at the inn or emptying his purse into his hands, which he would have been certain to do under other circumstances. "'Tis is well. Tell your master that you overtook me, and that I obeyed him instantly. Shall I say nothing to Mademoiselle de Lartigues?" "Yes. Tell her that her brother appreciates the feeling which dictates her action, and is deeply indebted to her. Castoren, saddle the horses." Without another word to the messenger, who was thunderstruck by this ungracious reception, Knowles went up once more to the Viscount's room, and found him pale and trembling and completely dressed. "You may set your mind at rest, Viscount," said Knowles. "You are rid of me for the rest of your journey. I am about to take my leave in the king's service." When the Viscount asked with a vestige of apprehension, "Instantly. I am going to Mantes, where the court now is." "Adieu, monsieur." The young man could hardly utter the words, and sank upon a chair, not daring to meet his companion's eye. Knowles stepped up to him. "I shall never see you again in all probability," he said, with deep emotion. "Who knows?" said the Viscount, trying to smile. "Promise one thing to a man who will never forget you." said Canolles, laying his hand upon his heart, and his tone and his gesture alike indicated absolute sincerity. What is it that you will sometimes think of him? I promise. Without anger? Yes. Will you give me any token in support of your promise? The Viscount put out his hand. Canolles took the trembling hand in his own, with no purpose to do aught but press it. But in obedience to an impulse stronger than his will, he put it to his lips and imprinted an ardent kiss upon it, then rushed from the room, murmuring, "Ah, Nanon, Nanon, can you ever make up to me what you have caused me to lose?" Chapter 12. If we now turn aside for a moment and cast a glance at the princesses of the House of Conde in their exile at Chantilly, of which Riccon drew such a distressing picture to the Viscount, this is what we shall see. Beneath the spreading chestnuts, powdered with snowy blossoms on the smooth, velvety lawns sloping down to the peaceful blue ponds, a swarm of laughing, chatting, singing promenaders wandered to and fro. Here and there amid the tall grass could be seen the figure of a solitary reader, lost in waves of verdure, where naught could be distinctly seen save the white page of the book in her hand, which belonged perhaps to M. de la Calpurnide's Cleopatra, to M. d'Irfesistri, or to Mademoiselle de Scudéry's Grand Cyrus. Beneath the arbors of honeysuckle and clematis could be heard the sweet strains of lutes and invisible voices singing. At intervals a horseman, bearing a dispatch, passed like a flash along the main avenue leading to the chateau. Meanwhile, upon the terrace, 3 women, dressed in satin and followed at a distance by mute and respectful equerries, were walking gravely to and fro with ceremonious, majestic gestures. In the middle, a lady of noble and stately figure, despite her 57 years, was holding forth magisterially upon affairs of state. At her right, a young lady clad in garments of somber hue and holding herself stiffly erect, listened with contracted brows to her neighbor's learned views. At her left, another older lady, the stiffest and primmest of the 3, because she was of less illustrious rank, was talking, listening, and meditating all at once. The lady in the middle was a dowager princess, mother of the victor of Rocroi, Norlingen, and Lens, who was just beginning, since he had become an object of persecution, and the persecution had landed him at Vincennes, to be called the Great Conde, a name which posterity has continued to bestow upon him. This lady, upon whose features could still be detected traces of that beauty, which made her the object of the last and maddest of all the passions of Henri IV, had been wounded in her mother-love, and in her pride as Princess of the Blood, by a Ficino Italiano, who was called Mazarini when he was Cardinal Benevolio's servant, but who was now called His Eminence Cardinal Mazarin, since he had become of Austria's lover, and first minister of the Kingdom of France. He it was who dared to imprison Condé, and to send the noble prisoner's wife and mother into exile at Chantilly. The lady at her right was Claire Clemence de Maille, Princesse de Condé, who, in accordance with an aristocratic custom of the time, was called Madame la Princesse, simply to signify that the wife of the head of the Condé family was the first princess of the blood, the princess par excellence. She was always proud, but her pride had gained intensity since her persecution, and she had become haughty and supercilious. It was a fact that her husband's imprisonment raised her to the rank of a heroine, after being compelled to play only a secondary part so long as he was free. Her state was more deplorable than widowhood, and her son, the Duc d'Enghien, just completing his 7th year, was more interesting than an orphan. The eyes of the nation were upon her, and without fear of being laughed at, she dressed in mourning. Since the forced exile of these 2 weeping women by direction of and of Austria, their piercing shrieks had changed to muttered threats. From being the victims of oppression, they had become rebels. Madame la Princesse, Themistocles in a mob cap, had her Miltiades in petticoats, and the laurels of Madame de Longueville, for an instant queen of Paris, disturbed her slumbers. The duenna at the left was the Marquise de Turville, who did not venture to write novels, but exercised her pen upon political subjects. She did not make war in person like the valorous Pompey, nor did she, like him, receive a bullet at the Battle of Corbie. But her husband, who was a highly esteemed officer, was wounded at La Rochelle and killed at Fribourg, the result being that she inherited his fortune, and fancied that she inherited at the same time his genius for war. Since she joined the Princesses de Condé at Chantilly, she had sketched 3 plans of campaign, all of which had successively aroused the enthusiasm of the ladies of the suite, and had been not abandoned, but postponed until a moment when the sword should be drawn and the scabbard thrown away. She did not dare put on her husband's uniform, although she sometimes longed to do so, but she had a sword hanging in her room over the head of her bed, and now and then, when she was alone, she would draw it from its sheath with an exceedingly martial air. Chantilly, notwithstanding its holiday aspect, was in reality nothing but a vast barrack, and a diligent search would have discovered powder in the cellars and bayonets in the hedgerows. The three ladies, in their lugubrious promenade, bent their steps toward the main door of the chateau, and seemed to be expecting the arrival of some messenger with important news. Several times the Princess Dowager had said, shaking her head and sighing, "We shall fail, my daughter. We shall be humiliated." "We must expect to pay something as the price of the great glory we are to win," said Madame de Turville, without relaxing the stiffness of her demeanor in any respect. "There is no victory without a combat. If we fail, if we are vanquished," said the young princess, "we will avenge yourselves." "Madam," said the Princess Dowager, "if we fail, it will be that God has vanquished Monsieur le Prince. Pray, would you dream of seeking to be revenged on God?" The younger princess bowed her head before her mother-in-law's superb humility. Indeed, these three personages, saluting one another thus and offering incense at one another's shrine, were not unlike a bishop and two deacons, who make God the pretext of their mutual homage. "Neither Monsieur de Turin, Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld, nor Monsieur de Bouillon," murmured the dowager. "They all fail us at once." "And no money," added Madame de Tourville. "On whom can we rely?" said Madame la Princesse. "If Claire herself has forgotten us?" "Who tells you, my daughter, that Madame de Cams has forgotten us? She does not return. Perhaps she has been prevented. The roads are watched by Monsieur de Saint-Aignan's army, you know. At all events," she could write, "how can you wish that she should put upon paper a reply of such moment, the adhesion of a city like Bordeaux to the party of the princes? No, that is not the aspect of the affair which disturbs me most by any means. Moreover," suggested Madame de Turville, "one of the three plans which I had the honor to lay before your Highness proposed an uprising in Guyenne as a certain means of accomplishing an object." "Yes, yes, and we will recur to it if necessary," replied Madame la Princesse. "But I agree with Madame my mother, and I begin to think that Claire must have fallen under suspicion. Otherwise she would be here before this. Perhaps her farmers have failed to keep their word. A peasant will always seize an opportunity to avoid paying his debts. And who can say what the Guyenne people may or may not have done despite their promises? Gascons, braggarts," said Madame de Tourville. "Brave individually, it may be, but bad soldiers en masse. They do very well to shout, 'Vive Monsieur le Prince,' when they're afraid of the Spaniard. That's all. They have a thorough detestation for Monsieur d'Epernon, however," said the Princess Dowager. "They hanged him in effigy at Agen, and promised to hang him in person at Bordeaux. If he ever returned there—" "He will return there, and hang the braggarts themselves," said Madame la Princesse, indignantly. "And all this," rejoined Madame de Tourville, "is the fault of Monsieur Lennet. Monsieur Pierre Lennet," she repeated affectedly, "the stubborn adviser whom you persist in keeping by you, and who is good for nothing but to thwart all our plans. If he had not frowned upon my second plan, the purport of which was, you remember, to take by surprise the Chateau de Vers, Isle St. George, and the fort of Blaye, we should be besieging Bordeaux ere now, and Bordeaux would be obliged to capitulate. I prefer, with deference to their Highnesses' opinion, that Bordeaux should open its gates of its own free will," said a voice behind Madame de Turville, in a tone of respect, not unmixed with a tinge of irony. "A city that capitulates yields to force and incurs no obligation, whereas a city which opens its gates freely thereby compromises itself, and must needs follow to the end the fortunes of those to whom it has offered itself." The three ladies turned and saw Pierre Lennet, who, as they were taking one of their turns toward the main door of the chateau upon which their eyes were constantly fixed, had emerged from a smaller door on a level with the terrace, and approached them from behind. What Madame de Tourville said was true in part. Pierre Lennet, one of Monsieur le Prince's advisers, a cold, grave, but very shrewd man, was commissioned by the prisoner to keep an eye on his friends and foes alike, and it must be said that he had much more difficulty in preventing the prince's friends from compromising his cause than in foiling the evil designs of his foes. But Being endowed with cleverness and craft of a lawyer and accustomed to the sharp practice and jugglery of the tribunals, he usually triumphed, either by some timely counterplot or by passive opposition. It was at Chantilly itself that the battles had to be fought which taxed his powers to the utmost. The self-esteem of Madame de Turville, the impatience of Madame la Princesse, and the aristocratic inflexibility of the Dowager were quite as hard to deal with as the astuteness of Mazarin, the pride of Austria, and the indecision of the Parliament. Lennet, to whom the princes addressed their correspondence, had established a rule that he would give the princesses no news except at what he himself deemed an opportune time. For as feminine diplomacy is not always shrouded in mystery, which is a cardinal principle of the masculine variety, many of Lennet's plans have been in this way betrayed by his friends to his enemies. The two princesses who, notwithstanding the opposition they encountered at his hands, none the less appreciated Pierre Lennet's devotion, and especially his usefulness, welcomed him with a friendly gesture. There was even the shadow of a smile upon the dowager's lips. "Well, my dear Lennet," she said, "you heard Madame de Tourville complaining, or rather commiserating us. Everything is going from bad to worse. Ah, my dear Lennet, our affairs. "Madam," said Lennet, "I am very far from taking so gloomy a view of our affairs as your highness. I hope much from time, and from a change in the tide of fortune. You know the proverb, everything succeeds with him who knows how to wait." "Time, and a change in the tide of fortune," exclaimed Madame la Princesse. "That's philosophy and not politics, Monsieur Lennet." Lennet smiled. "Philosophy is useful in all things, madam, especially in politics. It teaches us not to be overladen with success, and to be patient in adversity." "I care not," said Madame de Tourville. "I would give more to see a courier than for all your maxims. Don't you say the same, Madame la Princesse?" "Yes, I confess it," replied Madame de Condé. "Your highness will be satisfied in that case, for you will receive 3 today," rejoined Lennet, as coolly as before. "What 3?" "Yes, madam. The first has been seen on the Bordeaux road, the second is coming from Stenay, and the third from La Rochefoucauld." The two princesses uttered an exclamation of joyful surprise. Madame de Tourville bit her lips. "It seems to me, my dear Monsieur Pierre," she said in a wheedling tone, to conceal her vexation, and wrap in a coating of sugar the bitter remark she was about to make, "it seems to me that a skillful necromancer like yourself ought not to stop short after such a fine start, and that, having announced the arrival of the couriers, you should tell us the contents of their dispatches." "My knowledge, madam, doesn't extend as far as you think," said he modestly. "It confines itself to being a faithful servitor. I announce, but I do not guess." At the same moment, as if Lennet were in reality served by a familiar spirit, they spied 2 horsemen who came riding to the great gate of the chateau and galloped up the avenue. Immediately a swarm of idlers, deserting the lawns and flower gardens, swooped down to the avenue railings to have their share of the news. The horsemen dismounted, and one of them, tossing to the other, who seemed to be his servant, the bridle rein of his foam-covered steed, ran rather than walked toward the princesses who came forward to meet him, and stepped upon the balcony at one end as he stepped upon it at the other. "Claire," cried Madame la Princesse. "Yes, your highness." "Accept my most humble respects, madam." Kneeling upon one knee, the young man tried to take the princess's hand to imprint a respectful kiss upon it. "Come to my arms, dear Viscountess, my arms," cried Madame de Condé, raising her. Having submitted to Madame la Princesse embrace with all possible respect, the cavalier turned to the Princess Dowager, to whom he made a low bow. "Speak quickly, dear Claire," said she. "Yes, speak," added Madame de Condé. "Have you seen Riccon?" "Yes, madam, and he entrusted me with a message for you." "Good news or bad?" "I do not know myself. The message consists of 2 words." "What are they?" "Quick. I am dying with impatience." The keenest anxiety was depicted on the features of both princesses. "Bordeaux, yes," said Claire, herself anxious as to the effect the 2 words would produce. But she was soon reassured, for the princesses received them with a triumphant exclamation, which brought Lennet from the other end of the balcony. "Lennet, Lennet, come, come," cried Madame la Princesse. "You do not know the news our good Claire brings us." "Yes, madam," said Lennet, smiling, I do know it. That is why I did not hurry to meet her. What? You know it. Bordeaux, yes, isn't that it? In truth, my dear Pierre, you must be a sorcerer, said the dowager. If you knew it, Lennet, said Madame la Princesse reproachfully. Why? Seeing our anxiety, did you not relieve it with those 2 words? Because I wish to allow Madame de Cams to receive the reward of her fatiguing journey, replied Lennet, with a motion of his head toward Claire, who was deeply moved, and also because I fear an explosion of joy on the part of your highnesses out on the terrace in everybody's sight. You are right, Pierre, always right, my good Pierre, said Madame la Princesse. Let us say nothing. And we owe this to the gallant Rick Hahn, said the Princess Dowager. Hasn't he done well, compere Lennet, and aren't you content with him? Compere was the Princess Dowager's pet word. It was a reminiscence of Henri IV, who used it frequently. Rick Hahn is a man of brain and energy, madam, and I pray your highness to believe that if I had not been as sure of him as of myself, I would not have recommended him. What shall we do for him? Said Madame la Princesse. We must give him some important post, said the dowager. Some important post? Your highness cannot think of doing so, interposed Madame de Tourville, sourly. You forget that Monsieur Rick Hahn is not of gentle birth. Nor am I, madam, retorted Lennet, which fact does not prevent Monsieur le Prince from having some confidence in me. I believe. Most assuredly do I admire and respect the nobility of France. But there are circumstances in which a noble heart, I venture to say, is worth more than an ancient coat of arms. Why did not good Rick Hahn come himself to tell us this joyful tidings? Asked Madame la Princesse. He remained in Guyenne to raise troops. He told me that he could already count upon nearly 300 men, but he says that, from want of time, they will be but ill-equipped to take the field, and he would much prefer that we should obtain for him the command of a place like Vers or Isle St. George. There, he says, he would be sure of making himself useful to your highnesses. But how can we obtain it? Asked the princess. We are in too bad odor at court at this moment to recommend anyone, and if we should undertake it, whoever we might recommend would become on the instant an object of suspicion. Perhaps, madam, said the Viscountess, a method which Monsieur Rick Hahn himself suggested to me may be practicable. What is that? Monsieur d'Epernon is, it appears, continued the Viscountess, blushing, very much in love with a certain young woman. Ah, yes, the fair Nanon, said Madame la Princesse disdainfully. We know about that. Well, it seems that the Duc d'Epernon can refuse nothing to this young woman, and that she disposes of whatever anyone chooses to purchase from her. Could not you purchase a commission for Monsieur Rick Hahn? It would be money well placed, said Lennet. True, but the chest is empty, as you well know, Monsieur le Consigliere, said Madame de Tourville. Lennet turned with a smile to Madame de Cams. This is the moment, madam, said he, to prove to their highnesses that you have forgotten nothing. What do you mean, Lennet? He means, madam, that I am fortunate enough to be able to offer you a paltry sum, which I have collected with much difficulty from my farmers. The offering is a very modest one, but I could do no more. 20,000 livres, she continued, hesitating and lowering her eyes, ashamed to offer so small a sum to the 2 first ladies in the realm next to Queen. 20,000 livres, they cried with one accord. Why, it's a fortune in times like these, continued the dowager. Dear Claire, exclaimed Madame la Princesse, how can we ever repay our obligation to her? Your Highness will think of that later. Where's this money? Inquired Madame de Tourville. In her Highness's apartment, whither I bade Pompey, my squire, to carry it. Lennet, said Madame la Princesse, you will remember that we owe this sum to Madame de Cams. It is already carried to her credit, said Lennet, producing his tablets, and pointing out the Viscountess's 20,000 livres set down, under that date, in a column, the total of which would have alarmed the princesses somewhat if they had taken the trouble to add it. Pray, how did you succeed in reaching here, dear Claire? Said Madame la Princesse. For we are told that Monsieur de Saint-Aignan is watching the road and searching every traveler, for all the world like a customs officer. Thanks to Pompey's superior wisdom, madam, we avoided that danger by making a tremendous detour, which delayed us a day and a half, but assured our safety. Except for that I should have arrived day before yesterday. Have no uneasiness on that score, madam, said Leonard. "There is no time lost as yet, but we must see to it that we make good use of today and tomorrow. Today, as your highnesses will remember, we expect 3 couriers. One has already arrived. The other 2 are still to come." "May we know the names of these others, monsieur?" asked Madame de Tourville, still hoping to catch the counselor at fault, for she was constantly at war with him, and though the war was not declared, it was none the less real. "The first, if my expectations are fulfilled, will be Gourville. He comes from the Duc de la Rochefoucauld." "From the Prince de Marsillac, you mean," rejoined Madame de Tourville. "Monsieur le Prince de Marsillac is now Duc de la Rochefoucauld, madame." "His father is dead, then?" "A week since." "Where did he die?" "Adverteury." "And the second?" asked Madame la Princesse. "The second is Blanchefort, captain of Monsieur le Prince's guards. He comes from Stenay, from Monsieur de Turin." "In that case," said Madame de Tourville, "I think that, to avoid any loss of time, we should recur to the first plan I suggested in the probable event of the adhesion of Bordeaux, and the alliance of Messrs. de Turin and de Marsillac." Leonard smiled as usual. "Pardon me, madam," said he, in his most courteous tone, "but the plans formed by Monsieur le Prince himself are at this moment in process of execution, and bid fair to be entirely successful." "The plans formed by Monsieur le Prince," retorted Madame de Tourville, sharply, "by Monsieur le Prince, who is in the dungeon of Vincennes, and has no communication with anybody. Here are his Highness's orders, written by his own hand, dated yesterday," said Leonard, taking from his pocket a letter from the Prince de Condé, "and received by me this morning. We are in correspondence." The paper was almost snatched from his hands by the 2 princesses, who devoured, with tears of joy, all that it contained. "Ah, do Leonard's pockets contain the whole kingdom of France?" said the Princess Dowager, laughingly. "Not yet, madam, not yet, but with God's help I will so act as to make them large enough for that. Now," continued Leonard, with a significant glance at the Viscountess, "Madame la Vicomtesse must stand in need of rest, for her long journey." The Viscountess understood that Leonard wished to be left alone with the princesses, and at a smile from the Dowager which confirmed that impression, she courtesied respectfully and took her leave. Madame de Tourville remained and promised herself an ample harvest of mysterious information, but upon an almost imperceptible sign from the Dowager to her daughter-in-law, the 2 princesses spontaneously, by a stately reverence, executed in accordance with all the rules of etiquette, signified to Madame de Tourville that the political conclave in which she was summoned to take part had reached its term. The lady of theories understood the hint perfectly, returned their salute by a reverence even more solemn and ceremonious than theirs, and withdrew, calling upon God to bear witness to the ingratitude of princes. The ladies passed into their study, and Pierre Leonard followed them. "Now," said he, after making sure that the door was securely locked, "if your highnesses care to receive Gourville, he has arrived and changed his clothes, not daring present himself in his traveling costume. What news does he bring?" "That Monsieur la Rochefoucauld will be here this evening or tomorrow with 500 gentlemen." "500 gentlemen," cried the princess. "Why, T is a veritable army, which will add to the difficulties of our journey. I should have preferred 5 or 6 faithful servitors only to all this display. We can more easily conceal our movements from Monsieur de Saint-Aignan. Now it will be almost impossible to reach the south without being molested." "If we are molested, so much the better," cried the princess. "For we are molested we will fight, and we shall win. Monsieur de Condé's spirit will march with us." Leonard glanced at the Dowager as if to ask her opinion also, but Charlotte de Montmorency, who grew to womanhood during the civil wars of Louis XIII, and had seen so many noble heads bend to enter prison or roll upon the scaffold for having sought to hold themselves erect, sadly passed her hand across her brow, laden with painful memories. "Yes," said she, "we are reduced to that alternative, to hide or to fight. A frightful state of things. We were living in peace, with such glory as God had bestowed upon our house. We had no other desire, at least I hope that no one of us had any other, than to remain in the station to which we were born. And lo, the exigencies of the time force us to contend against our master." "Madam," interposed the younger princess, impetuously, "I look with less anguish than your highness upon the necessity to which we are reduced. My husband and my brother are undergoing confinement unworthy of their rank. That husband and that brother are your sons. Furthermore, your daughter is prescribed. These facts assuredly justify whatever enterprises we may undertake. True, said the dowager, with melancholy resignation. True, I endure it all with more patience than yourself, madam, but it is because it seems as if it were our destiny to be prescribed or imprisoned. I had no sooner become the wife of your husband's father than I was compelled to leave France, pursued by the love of King Henri IV. We had no sooner returned than we were consigned to Vincennes, pursued by the hatred of Cardinal de Richelieu. My son, who is in prison today, was born in prison, and after 32 years has renewed his acquaintance with the room in which he was born. Alas, your father-in-law, Monsieur le Prince, was right in his gloomy prophecies. When the result of the Battle of Rocroi was made known to him, when he was taken into the great hall hung with flags captured from the Spaniards, he said, turning to me, God knows the joy that my son's exploit affords me. But remember, madam, that the more glory our family acquires, the greater will be the misfortunes that overtake it. If it were not that I bear the arms of France, too noble a blazonry to be cast aside, I would take from my crest a falcon betrayed and recaptured by the ringing of his bells, with this legend, Fama nocet. We have made too much noise in the world, my daughter, and that is what injures us. Do not you agree with me, Lennet? Madam, Lennet replied, deeply afflicted by the memories awakened by the princess, Your Highness is right, but we have gone too far to retreat now. More than that, in circumstances like our present ones, it is most essential to make up our minds promptly. We must not deceive ourselves as to our situation. We are free only in appearance. The Queen has her eye upon us, and Monsieur de Saint-Aignan is blockading us. The question we have to solve is how we are to leave Chantilly despite the Queen's vigilance and Monsieur de Saint-Aignan's blockade. Leave Chantilly. Why, we will leave it with heads erect, cried Madame la Princesse. I am of the same opinion, said the Princess Dowager. The Condés are not Spaniards, and they do not play false. They are not Italians, and they do not resort to trickery. What they do in broad daylight, with heads erect. Madam, said Lennet, in a tone of conviction, God is my witness that I will be the first to execute your Highness's commands, whatever they may be. But in order to leave Chantilly in the way you describe, we must fight our way. You do not intend, of course, to become women again in the day of battle, after taking a man's part in council. You will march at the head of your supporters, and you will be the ones to furnish your soldiers with their war cry. But you forget that closely connected with your precious lives, another life, no less precious, is beginning to assume prominence, that of the Duc d'Enghien, your son and grandson. Will you incur the risk of burying in the same grave the present and the future of your family? Do you imagine that Mazarin will not make use of the father as a hostage when such rash enterprises are undertaken in the name of the son? Have you forgotten the secrets of the dungeon of Vincennes, which were investigated under such melancholy circumstances by the Grand Prior Vadome, by Marshal d'Ornano, and by Paul Laurens? Have you forgotten the fatal chamber, which, as Madame de Rambouillet says, is worth its weight in arsenic? No, mesdames, continued Lennet, clasping his hands. No, you will hearken to the advice of your faithful counselor. You will take your departure from Chantilly, as it is fitting that persecuted women should do. Remember that your surest weapon is weakness. A child bereft of its father, a woman bereft of her husband, a mother bereft of her son, escape as they may from the snare in which they are caught. Before you act or speak openly, wait until you no longer serve as guarantees to the stronger party. Prisoners, your supporters will remain mute. Free, they will declare themselves, having no further reason to fear that anyone will dictate to them conditions of your ransom. Our plan is concerted with Gourville. We are sure of a strong escort, which will protect us from insult on the road. For today, 20 different factions are in the field, and preying indiscriminately upon friend and foe. Give your consent. Everything is in readiness. Leave Chantilly in disguise. Like malefactors, cried the young princess. Oh, what will my husband say when he learns that his mother, his wife, and his son have done such a shameful thing? I know not what he will say, madam, but if you succeed, he will owe his liberty to you. If you fail, you risk the loss of none of your advantages, especially not your position. as you would do by a battle. The dowager reflected a moment before she said sadly, "Dear Monsieur Lennet, convince my daughter, for, so far as I personally am concerned, I am compelled to remain here. I have struggled on until now, but at last I must succumb the pain which is consuming me and which I try in vain to hide, that I may not bring discouragement on those about me, will soon hold me fast upon a bed of suffering, which will perhaps be my deathbed. But, as you have said, we must, before everything, look to the fortune of the Condés. My daughter and my grandson will leave Chantilly, and will, I trust, be sufficiently well advised to abide by your counsel. I say more, by your commands. Command, Lennet, and you will be obeyed." "You are pale, madam," cried Lennet, supporting the dowager, as Madame la Princesse, alarmed at her sudden pallor, took her in her arms. "Yes," said the dowager, growing manifestly weaker. "Yes, the glad tidings of the day have done me more harm than the anguish of the last few days. I feel that an internal fever is consuming me, but let us make no sign. At such a moment, it might work severe injury to our cause." "Madam," said Lennet in a low voice, "your Highness's indisposition would be a blessing from heaven if it did not cause you to suffer. Keep your bed, and spread the report that you are ill. Do you, madam," he continued, addressing the young princess, "summon your physician Bourdelot. And as we shall soon need to make a requisition upon the stables, let it be known everywhere that it is your purpose to have a stag hunt in the park. In that way no one will be surprised to see men, weapons, and horses in large numbers. Do it yourself, Lennet. But how can it be that so clear-sighted a man as you are does not feel that this hunting party, given at the very moment that my mother falls ill, will cause remark? That is all provided for, madam. Is not day after tomorrow Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien's 7th birthday, when he is to be taken from the charge of women? Yes. Very well. We will say that this hunting party is given to celebrate the young prince's first pair of breeches, and that her highness was so determined that her illness should not interfere with this function that you could but yield to her wishes." "An excellent idea," cried the dowager, with a joyful smile, proud and delighted at the thought of this manner proclaiming the virility of her grandson. "Yes, it's an excellent suggestion, and you are indeed a worthy counselor, Lennet. But should Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien follow the hunt in a carriage?" asked the princess. "No, madam, on horseback." "Oh, let not your mother's heart take alarm. I have devised the expedient of a small saddle, which Vilas, his equerry, will place immediately in front of his own. In that way, Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien will be seen, and in the evening we can take our departure in all security. For Monsieur d'Enghien will be able to go anywhere on foot or in the saddle, whereas in the carriage he will be arrested at the first obstacle. You think, then, that we should go? Day after tomorrow in the evening, if your Highness has no reason for postponing your departure." "Oh, no. On the contrary, let us escape from our prison at the earliest possible moment, Lennet." "Once away from Chantilly, what is your plan?" the dowager inquired. "We shall pass through Monsieur de Saint-Aignan's forces, finding some means to tie a bandage over his eyes. We shall join Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld and his escort, and go on to Bordeaux, where we are expected. Once in possession of the second city in the realm, the capital of the south, we can negotiate or make war, as seems best to your Highness. However, I have the honor to remind you, madam, that even at Bordeaux, we shall have no chance of holding out for a considerable time, unless we control some posts in the vicinity to divert the attention of the royal troops. 2 of these posts especially are of the greatest importance. Vers, which commands the Dordogne, and would keep open a way to send supplies into the city, and Isle St. George, which the Bordelais themselves consider the key of their city. But we will think of that later. For the moment, let us confine ourselves to the method of leaving this place." "Nothing can be simpler, I think," said Madame la Princesse. "We are alone and masters here, whatever you may say, Lennet." "Rely upon nothing, madam, until you are at Bordeaux. Nothing is simple in a contest with the diabolical mind of Monsieur de Mazarin, and if I waited until we were alone to describe my plan to your Highness, it was to satisfy my conscience, I assure you, for I tremble at this moment for the secrecy of my plan, which my single brain conceived and which no ears but yours have heard. Monsieur de Mazarin doesn't learn things, he divines them." "Oh, I defy him to divine this," said the princess. "But let us assist my mother to her apartment. I will immediately give out the fact of a hunting party for day after tomorrow. Do you look to the matter of invitations, Lennet?" "Rely upon me, madam." The dowager went to her apartment, and at once took to her bed. Budlot, family physician to the Condés and preceptor to Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien, was summoned. The report of her sudden indisposition was quickly circulated, and within half an hour arbors, balconies, gardens were deserted, all the guests hastening to the Princess Dowager's antechamber. Lennet passed the whole day in writing, and that same evening above 50 invitations were sent out in all directions in the hands of the numerous retainers of that royal establishment. Chapter 13. The next day, but one following, which was a day appointed for putting Pierre Lennet's plans in execution, was one of the gloomiest of spring days, a season which is traditionally called the most beautiful of the year, but which is always, especially in France, the most disagreeable. A fine, soaking rain was falling in the parterres of Chantilly, streaking the clumps of trees in the garden, and the hedgerows in the park with a grayish mist. In the great courtyards 50 horses, already saddled, were standing about the hitching posts, sad-eyed, with ears drooping, impatiently pawing the ground. Packs of hounds and couples were waiting in groups of 12, breathing noisily, gaping between whiles, and striving by their united efforts to run away with the groom, who was wiping the rain-soaked ears of his favorites. The whippers in chamois livery, with their hands behind their backs and their horns slung over their shoulders, wandered hither and thither. Some few officers, inured to storms by their experience at Rocroi or Lens, defied the rain and whiled away the weary time of waiting by talking together in groups upon the terraces and outer staircases. Everyone was notified that it was a ceremonious occasion, and had assumed his most solemn expression to see Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien, wearing his first pair of breeches, hunt his first stag. Every officer in the prince's service, every adherent of the illustrious family, invited by Lennet's circular letter, had fulfilled what he considered his bounden duty by hastening to Chantilly. The anxiety aroused in the first instance by the condition of the Princess Dowager was dissipated by a favorable bulletin from Bordelot. She had been bled, and had that morning taken an emetic, the universal panacea at that period. At 10 o'clock all Madame de Condé's personal guests had arrived. Each one was admitted upon presenting his letter of invitation, and those who, by any chance, had neglected to bring it, upon being recognized by Lennet, were admitted by the Swiss at a nod from him. These guests, with a household staff, constituted a body of 80 or 90 men, most of whom were gathered about the superb white horse, upon whose back, just in front of the great French saddle, was a little velvet seat with back, intended for Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien, where he was to take his place when Vilas, his equerry, should have taken his seat upon the principal saddle. However, there was as yet no suggestion of beginning the hunt, but they seemed to await the arrival of additional guests. About 10:30, 3 gentlemen, followed by 6 valets, all armed to the teeth, and carrying valises so swollen that one would have said they were starting out to make the tour of Europe, rode in at the gate, and noticing the posts in the courtyard, apparently put there for that purpose, attempted to hitch their horses to them. Immediately a man dressed in blue, with a silver baldric, halberd in hand, accosted the newcomers, who, by their drenched clothing and their mud-stained boots, were easily recognized as travelers from a distance. "Whence come you, messers?" said this functionary. "From the north," one of them replied. "Whither go you?" "To the burial." "The proof?" "You see our crape." It was a fact that the 3 masters had each a piece of crape on their swords. "Excuse me, messers," said the halberdier. "The chateau is yours. There is a table spread, an apartment warmed, servants awaiting your orders. Your people will be entertained in the servants' quarters." The gentlemen, who were honest rustics, half-starved and inquisitive, bowed, dismounted, threw their reins to their servants, and having been shown the way to the dining hall, betook themselves thither. A chamberlain awaited them at the door, and acted as their guide. Meanwhile the horses were taken off the hands of the strange servants by the servants of the house, taken to the stables, rubbed down, brushed, watered, and confronted with a trough well supplied with oats and a rack filled with hay. The 3 gentlemen had hardly taken their places at the table, when 6 other horsemen, followed by 6 lackeys armed and equipped like those we had described, rode in as they did, and like them, seeing the posts, essayed to hitch their horses to the rings. But the man with the halberd, who had received strict orders, approached them and repeated his questions. "Whence come you?" said he. "From Picardy. We are officers in Turin." "Whither go you?" "To the burial." "The proof? You see our crape." And like their predecessors, they pointed to the crape attached to the hilt of their rapiers. The same attention was shown to them, and they followed the others to the dining hall. The same care was bestowed upon their horses, who followed the other horses to the stables. Behind them came 4 others, and the same scene was renewed. Between 10:30 and noon, 2 by 2, 4 by 4, 5 by 5, alone or in parties, shabbily or sumptuously dressed, but all well mounted, well armed, and well equipped, 100 cavaliers made their appearance, all of whom were questioned according to the same formula, and replied by stating whence they came and that they were going to burial, and by exhibiting their crape. When they had all dined and become acquainted with one another, while their people were being entertained and their horses were resting, Leonard entered the room where they were all assembled and said to them, "Messieurs, Madame la Princesse thanks you by my mouth for the honor you have done her by calling upon her on your way to join Monsieur le Duc de la Rochefoucauld, who awaits your coming to celebrate the obsequies of his late father. Look upon this house as your own, and deign to take part in the diversion of a stag hunt, ordered to take place this afternoon by Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien, who dons today his first pair of breeches." A murmur of approbation and gratitude welcomed the first part of Leonard's harangue, who, like a practiced orator, paused for that purpose. "After the hunt," he continued, "you will sup with Madame la Princesse, who desires to thank you in person. Thereafter you will be at liberty to continue your journey." Some of the gentlemen paid particular attention to the announcement of this program, which seemed to some extent to impose fetters on their free will. But in all likelihood they had been warned by Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld to expect something of the sort, for not one of them murmured. Some went to inspect their horses. Others had recourse to their portmanteaus to put themselves in fit condition to appear before the princesses, while others remained at table, talking about the state of affairs in the country, which seemed to have some affinity with the events of the day. Many walked about beneath the main balcony where Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien, his toilet completed, was expected to appear for the last time before his final farewell to female attendants. The young prince in his nursery, surrounded by nurses and playthings, did not realize his own importance. But the pride of birth manifested itself in full measure, and he gazed impatiently at the rich, yet simple costume in which he was to be dressed for the first time. It was a black velvet suit trimmed with unpolished silver, which made it appear as if he were dressed in mourning. Indeed, his mother, who was determined at all hazards to pose as a widow, thought seriously of speaking of him in a certain harangue as the poor orphan prince. But there was one who eyed these splendid garments even more longingly than the prince. A few feet from him, another child, a few months older than he, with red cheeks and light hair, overflowing with health and strength and childish petulance, was devouring with hungry eyes the luxurious surroundings of his more fortunate playfellow. Several times, unable to repress his curiosity, he had ventured to approach the chair upon which the fine clothes were spread out, and had slyly patted the velvet and caressed the trimming, while the little prince was looking in another direction. But at last it happened that he brought back his eyes in time, and Pierrot drew his hand away too late. "Take care," cried the prince sharply. "Take care, Pierrot, you'll spoil my new breeches. They're broidered velvet, Pierrot, and it fades when you touch it. I forbid you touching my breeches." Pierrot had the guilty hand behind his back, twisting his shoulders this way and that, as children of all ranks do when they are crossed. "Don't be angry, Louis," said Madame la Princesse to her son, whose features were disfigured by an ugly grimace. "If Pierrot touches your suit again, he shall be whipped." Pierrot changed his sulky expression for a threatening one. "Monseigneur is a prince," he said, "but I'm a gardener, and if Monseigneur is to keep me from touching his clothes, I won't let him play with my guinea hens. Ah, I'm stronger than Monseigneur, and he knows it." These imprudent words were no sooner out of Pierrot's mouth than the prince's nurse, who was Pierrot's mother, seized the independent youngster by the wrist and said, "Pierrot, you forget that Monseigneur is your master, the master of everything in the chateau and around the chateau, and so your guinea hens are his." "Why, I thought he was my brother," said Pierrot. "Your foster brother, yes." "If he's my brother, we ought to share. And if my guinea hens are his clothes are mine." The nurse was about to reply by a demonstration of the difference between a uterine brother and a foster brother. But the young prince, who wished Pierrot to witness his triumph from beginning to end, because he was especially desirous to excite Pierrot's admiration and envy, did not give her time. "Don't be afraid, Pierrot," said he. "I am not angry with you, and you shall see me in a little while on my fine white horse and my nice little saddle. I am going to hunt, and I shall kill the stag." "Oh, yes," retorted the irreverent Pierrot. "You'll stay a long while on horseback. You wanted to ride my donkey the other day, and my donkey threw you off onto the ground." "Yes, but today," rejoined the prince, with all the majesty he could summon to his assistance and find in his memory, "today I represent my papa, and I shall not fall. Besides, Violas will hold me in his arms." "Come, come," said Madame la Princesse, to cut short the discussion between the children. "Come and dress the prince. 1 o'clock is striking, and all our friends are waiting impatiently. Lennet, bid them give the signal for departure." Chapter 14. At the same instant the blast of the horn rang out in the courtyard and reached the most distant corners of the chateau. Thereupon each guest ran to his horse, finding him fresh and well rested, thanks to the care that had been bestowed upon him, and vaulted into the saddle. The huntsman with his stag-hounds, the whippers-in with their packs, were the first to set out. Then the gentleman drew up in line, and the Duc d'Enghien, mounted on the white horse and held his seat by Violas, made his appearance, surrounded by maids of honor, equerries, and gentlemen in waiting, and followed by his mother in a dazzling costume and riding a jet-black horse. By her side, upon a horse which she rode with charming grace, was the Vicomtesse de Cams, adorable in her female garb, which she had at last resumed to her great joy. All search for Madame de Tourville had been made in vain since the night before. She had disappeared. Like Achilles, she was sulking in her tent. This brilliant cavalcade was greeted with unanimous acclamations. The guests stood up in their stirrups, pointing out Madame la Princesse and Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien, who were strangers to most of the gentlemen, they having never been to court, and being unfamiliar with all this royal pomp. The child bowed with a fascinating smile, Madame la Princesse with majestic affability. They were the wife and son of the man whom his bitterest enemies called the first general in Europe. The first general in Europe was persecuted, pursued, imprisoned by the self-same persons whom he had saved from a foreign foe at Lens, and defended against the rebels at Saint-Germain. This was more than was necessary to arouse enthusiasm, and the enthusiasm knew no bounds. Madame la Princesse drank in with avidity all these proofs of her popularity. Then, upon Lennet's whispering a few words in her ear, she gave the signal for departure, and they soon passed from the gardens into the park, all the gates of which were guarded by soldiers of the Condé regiment. Behind the hunters the wickets were locked, and as if that precaution were insufficient to make sure that no false brother should take part in the festivities, the soldiers remained on sentry duty behind the wicket, and a halberdier, dressed and armed like the one in the courtyard, stood beside each of them, with orders open to none but those who could answer the 3 questions which composed the countersign. A moment after the gates were locked, the notes of the horn and the furious baying of the hounds announced that the stag was away. Meanwhile, on the other side of the park, opposite the wall built by the constable and the Montmorency, 6 horsemen had halted in the road to listen to the horns and the dogs, and seemed to be taking counsel together as they patted the necks of their panting steeds. In view of their entirely new costumes, the glistening accoutrements of their horses, the glossy cloaks which fell jauntily from their shoulders over their horses' tails, the magnificence of the weapons which could be seen through artistically devised openings, it was rather astonishing that such smart, well-favored cavaliers should hold aloof at a time when all the nobility of the neighborhood were assembled at the Chateau of Chantilly. These resplendent worthies were eclipsed, however, by their leader or by him who appeared to be their leader. Plumed hat, gilded baldric, elegant boots with golden spurs, a long sword with carved, open-work hilt. Such, with the accompaniment of superb sky-blue cloak à l'Espagnole, was this gentleman's equipment. "Pardieu!" he exclaimed, after a moment of deep reflection, during which his 5 comrades gazed at one another in astonishment. "How do we get into the park? By the gate or the wicket? Let us present ourselves at the first gate or the first wicket, and we shall get in all right. Cavaliers of our cut are not left outside, when men dressed like those we met this morning are admitted. I tell you again, Cavaignac, replied one of the five, that those same ill-clad men who, notwithstanding their dress and their rustic bearing, are in the park at this moment, had a great advantage over us, the countersign. We haven't it, and we can't get in. You think so, Ferguson? Said the first speaker, with some deference for the opinion of his lieutenant. Our readers will have recognized in him the adventurer whom they met in the early pages of this narrative. Do I think so? I am sure of it. Do you imagine that these people are hunting for the sake of hunting? Tar! They're conspiring, that's certain. Ferguson is right, said a third. They're conspiring, and we shan't be able to get in. A stag hunt isn't a bad thing, however, when one falls in with it on the road. Especially when one is tired of hunting men. Barabbas? Said Cavaignac. Well, it shall not be said that we allowed this one to pass under our noses. We are all that anyone need be to cut a decent figure at this fate. We are as shiny as new crown pieces. If Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien needs soldiers, where will he find smarter ones than we? If he needs conspirators, where will he find any more fashionably dressed? The least gorgeous of us has the bearing of a captain. And you, Cavaignac, rejoined Barabbas, would pass at need for a duke and peer. Ferguson said nothing. He was reflecting. Unfortunately, continued Cavaignac, laughing, Ferguson is not inclined to hunt today. Pest, said Ferguson. I've no special objection to hunting. It's a gentlemanly amusement which suits me to a-t, so I don't despise it myself, nor try to dissuade others. I simply say that an entrance to the park where they are hunting is made impossible by locked gates. Hark, cried Cavaignac, they're the horns sounding the tally-ho. But, continued Ferguson, what I say doesn't necessarily mean that we may not hunt. How can we hunt, blockhead, if we can't get in? I don't say that we can't get in, rejoined Ferguson. How the devil can we get in if the gates, which are open to others, are locked in our faces? Why shouldn't we make a breach in this little wall, for our private use, a breach through which we and our horses can pass, and behind which we certainly shall find no one to call us to account? Hurrah! Cried Cavaignac, waving his hat joyfully. Full reparation. Ferguson, you are the one brainy man among us, and when I have overturned the King of France and placed Monsieur Loup Prince on his throne, I will demand Signor Mazzarino Mazzarini's place for you. To work, my boys, to work. With that, Cavaignac sprang to the ground, and, assisted by his companions, one of whom sufficed to hold all the horses, he began to tear down the wall, already in a somewhat shaky condition. In a twinkling, the 5 workers opened a breach 3 or 4 feet wide. Then they remounted and followed Cavaignac into park. Now, said he, riding in the direction whence the sound of the horn seemed to come. Now, be refined and courteous, and I invite you to take supper with Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien. Chapter 15. We have said that our 6 gentlemen of recent manufacture were well mounted. Their horses also had the advantage over those of the cavaliers who arrived in the morning, that they were fresh. They therefore soon overtook the main body of the hunt, and took their places among the hunters without the least objection from any quarter. The great majority of the guests were from different provinces, and were not acquainted with one another, so that the intruders once in the park might easily pass for guests. Everything would have passed off as well as they could have wished, if they had kept to their proper station, or even if they had been content with outstripping the others and riding among the huntsmen and whippers-in. But it was not so. In a very few moments Cavaignac seemed to reach the conclusion that the hunt was given in his honor. He snatched a horn from the hands of one of the whippers-in, who did not dare refuse to give it to him, took the lead of the huntsmen, rode in front of the captain of the hunt again and again, cut through woods and hedges, blowing the horn in any but the right way, confusing the view with the lancer, the débouche with the rembouche, running down the dogs, overturning the whippers-in, saluting the ladies with jaunty air when he rode by them, swearing, yelling, and losing his head when he lost sight of them, at the last coming upon the stag, just as the animal, after swimming across the great pond, turned upon his pursuers and stood at bay. Holally, holally, cried Cavaignac, the stag is ours. Corbleu, we have him. Cavaignac, said Ferguson, who was only a length behind him. Cavaignac, you'll get us all turned out of the park. In God's name, be more quiet. But Carvignac heard not a word, and, seeing that the animal was getting the best of the dogs, dismounted and drew his sword, shouting with all the strength of his lungs. Halali, halali. His companions, excepting always the prudent Ferguson, encouraged by his example, were preparing to swoop down upon their prey, when the captain of the hunt interposed. Gently, monsieur, he said, waving Carvignac aside with his knife. Madame la Princesse directs the hunt. It is for her, therefore, to cut the stag's throat or to concede that honor to such person as she may please. Carvignac was recalled to himself by this sharp reprimand, and as he fell back with decidedly bad grace, he found himself suddenly surrounded by the crowd of hunters, the delay having given him time to come up. They formed a great circle about the beast, driven to bay at the foot of an oak, and surrounded by all the dogs. At the same moment Madame la Princesse was seen galloping up, preceding Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien, the gentleman in waiting and the ladies, who had made it a point of honor not to leave her. She was greatly excited. It was easy to imagine that she looked upon the simulacrum of war as the prelude to a real war. When she reached the center of the circle, she stopped, cast a haughty glance about her, and noticed Carvignac and his comrades, whom the officers of the hunt were eyeing uneasily and suspiciously. The captain drew near to her, knife in hand. It was a knife ordinarily used by Monsieur le Prince. The blade was of the finest steel, and the handle of silver gilt. "Does your highness know yonder gentleman?" he said in a low tone, glancing at Carvignac out of the corner of his eye. "No," said she, "but he was admitted, so he has undoubtedly known someone." "He is known to no one, your highness. Everyone whom I have questioned sees him today, for the first time. But he could not pass the gates without the countersign." "No, of course not," replied the captain, "and yet I venture to advise your highness to be on your guard." "First of all, we must know who he is," said the princess. "We shall soon know, madam." Lennet, who had ridden up with the princess, observed with his habitual smile, "I have sent a Norman, a Picard, and a Breton to talk with him, and he will be closely questioned. But for the moment, do not seem to be talking about him, or he will escape us." "Carvignac," said Ferguson, "I think that we are being discussed in high places. We shall do well to suffer an eclipse." "Do you think so?" said Carvignac. "Faith, what's the odds? I propose to be in at the death, come what come may." "It's a stirring spectacle, I know," said Ferguson, "but we may have to pay more for our places than at the Hotel de Bourgogne." "Madam," said the captain, presenting the knife to the princess, "to whom is your highness pleased to grant the honor of putting the stag to death?" "I reserve it for myself, monsieur," said the princess. "A woman of my station should accustom herself to the touch of steel and the sight of blood." "Namur," said the captain to the arquebusier, "be ready." The arquebusier stepped forward, arquebuse in hand, and took up his position within 20 feet of the animal. This maneuver was intended to ensure the princess's safety if the stag, driven to despair, as sometimes happens, should attack her instead of waiting meekly to be killed. Madame la Princesse dismounted, and with sparkling eyes, glowing cheeks, and lips slightly parted, walked toward the animal, who was almost entirely buried under the dogs, and seemed to be covered with a carpet of 1,000 colors. Doubtless the animal did not believe that death was to come to him from the hand of the lovely princess, from which he had eaten many and many a time. He had fallen upon his knees, and he tried to rise, letting fall from his eyes a great teardrop, which accompanies the death agony of the stag and the deer. But he had not time. The blade of the knife, glistening in the sun's rays, disappeared the hilt in his throat. The blood spurted out into the princess's face. The stag raised his head, and, casting a last reproachful glance at his beautiful mistress, fell forward and died. At the same instant all the horns blew the death blast, and a mighty shout arose, "Vive Madame la Princesse!" while the young prince stood up in his saddle and clapped his little hands in high glee. Madame la Princesse withdrew the knife from the animal's throat, glanced around with the look of an Amazon in her eyes, handed the dripping knife to the captain of the hunt, and remounted. Lennet thereupon drew nigh. "Does Madame la Princesse wish me to tell her," said he, with a smile, "of whom she was thinking when she cut the poor beast's throat a moment since?" "Yes, Lennet, I should be glad to have you tell me." "She was thinking of Monsieur Mazarin, and would have been glad to have him in the stag's place." "Yes, cried the princess. "That is quite true, and I will cut his throat without pity. I swear to you. But really, Lennet, you are a sorcerer." She turned to the rest of the company. "Now that the hunt is at an end, messers," said she, "please follow me. It is too late now to start another stag, and besides, supper awaits us." Carvignac acknowledged this invitation by a most graceful bow. "Pray, what are you doing, Captain?" queried Ferguson. "Pardieu, I am accepting. Didn't you hear Madame la Princesse invite us to supper, as I promised you that she would? Carvignac, you may take my advice or not, but if I were in your place, I would make for the breach in the wall. Ferguson, my friend, your natural perspicacity plays you false. Didn't you notice the orders given by yonder gentleman in black, who has the expression of a fox when he laughs, and of a badger when he doesn't laugh? Ferguson, the breach is guarded, and to make for the breach is to indicate a purpose to go out as we came in. But if that's the case, what is to become of us? Never fear, I will answer for everything." With that assurance, the 6 adventurers took their places in the midst of the gentlemen, and rode with them toward the chateau. Carvignac was not mistaken. They were closely watched. Lennet rode on the outskirts of the cavalcade. On his right was the captain of the hunt, and on his left the intendant of the Condé estates. "You are sure," said he, "that no one knows those men?" "No one. We have questioned more than 50 gentlemen, and the reply is always the same: perfect strangers to everybody." The Norman, the Picard, and the Breton had no further information to impart, but the Norman had discovered a breach in the park wall, and like an intelligent man had stationed guards there. "We must have recourse, then, to a more efficacious method," said Lennet. "We must not allow a handful of spies to compel us to send away 100 gallant fellows without accomplishing anything. Look to it, Monsieur l'Intendant, that no one is allowed to leave the courtyard or the gallery where the horsemen are to be entertained. Do you, Monsieur le Capitaine, as soon as the door of the gallery is closed, station a picket guard of 12 men with loaded muskets, in case of accident. Go. I will not lose sight of them." Lennet had no great difficulty in performing the duties he had imposed upon himself. Carvignac and his companions evinced no desire to fly. Carvignac rode among the foremost, twisting his mustache with a killing air. Ferguson followed him, relying upon his promise, for he knew his leader too well not to be sure that he would not be caught in that trap, even if it had no second issue. Barabbas and the other 3 followed their captain and lieutenant, thinking of nothing but the excellent supper that awaited them. They were in fact rather dull fellows, who with absolute indifference abandoned the intellectual portion of their social relations to their 2 leaders, in whom they had full and entire confidence. Everything took place in accordance with Lennet's intention, and his orders were carried out to the letter. Madame la Princesse took her place in the great reception room under a canopy, which served her for a throne. Her son was beside her, dressed as we have described. The guests exchanged glances. They had been promised a supper, but it was evident that they were to listen to a speech. The princess at last rose and began to speak. Her harangue was well calculated to arouse enthusiasm and make converts to her cause. On this occasion, Clemence de Malebrise gave free rein to her feelings and openly attacked Mazarin. Her hearers, electrified by the reminder of the insult offered to the whole nobility of France in the persons of the princes, and even more, it may be, by the hope of making an advantageous bargain with the court in case of success, interrupted the discourse again and again, calling God to witness, at the tops of their voices, that they would do faithful service in the cause of the illustrious house of Condé, and would help to rescue it from the state of degradation to which Mazarin wished to reduce it. Lovers of speeches will find this one entire in the memoirs of Pierre Lennet. For our own part, we agree with Henri IV, who claimed that he owed his gray hairs to the long speeches he had been compelled to listen to. "And so, messers," cried the princess, bringing her harangue to an end, "the support of your valor, the free offering of your devotion, is what the orphan before you asks of your noble hearts. You are our friends. At all events, you present yourselves here as such. What can you do for us?" After a moment of solemn silence, began one of the grandest and most affecting scenes that could be imagined. One of the gentlemen bowed with deep respect to the princess. "My name," said he, "is Gerard de Montalent. I bring with me 4 gentlemen, my friends. We have among us 5 good swords and 2,000 pistoles. which we place at Monsieur le Prince's service. Here are our credentials, signed by Monsieur le Duc de la Rochefoucauld. The princess bowed, took the letter from the hands of the speaker, passed it to Lennet, and motioned to the gentlemen to take their places at her right. As soon as they had obeyed her command, another gentleman rose. My name is Claude Raoul de Lessac, Comte de Clermont. I come with 6 gentlemen, my friends. We have each 1,000 pistoles, which we ask to be allowed to pour into your Highness's treasure chest. We are well armed and equipped, and a small daily wage will suffice for our needs. Here are our credentials, signed by Monsieur le Duc de Bouillon. Step to my right, gentlemen, said the princess, taking Monsieur de Bouillon's letter, which she read, as she read the other and passed to Lennet, and accept my grateful thanks. The gentleman obeyed. My name is Louis Ferdinand de Lorges, Comte de Duras, said a third. I come without friends and without money, my sword my only wealth and my only strength. But I cut my way through the enemy when I was besieged in Bellegarde. Here are my credentials for Monsieur le Vicomte de Turin. Come hither, monsieur, said the princess, taking the letter with one hand and giving him the other to kiss. Come and stand by my side. I make you one of my brigadiers. The same course was followed by all the gentlemen. All were provided with credentials from Monsieur de la Rochefoucauld, Monsieur de Bouillon, or Monsieur de Turin. All delivered their letters and passed to the right of the princess. When there was no more room on that side, they took their places at her left. The center of the great hall became gradually empty. Soon there remained only Cavaignac and his fellows, a solitary group, and upon them many suspicious and threatening glances were cast, accompanied by angry murmurs. Lennet glanced toward the door. It was securely locked. He knew that the captain and 12 armed men were on the other side. Bringing his piercing gaze to bear upon the strangers, he said, "And you, messers, who are you? Will you do us the honor to tell us your names and show us your credentials?" The beginning of this scene, the probable ending of which disturbed him beyond measure, had cast a shadow over the face of Ferguson, and his uneasiness gradually infected his companions, who, like Lennet, glanced in the direction of the door. But their leader, majestically enveloped in his cloak, had maintained throughout an impassive demeanor. At Lennet's invitation, he stepped forward and said, saluting the princess with ostentatious gallantry, "Madam, my name is Roland de Cavaignac, and I bring with me for your Highness's service these 5 gentlemen, who belong to first families of Guienne, but desire to retain their incognito. But you did not, of course, come to Chantilly without being recommended to us by someone," said the princess, thinking with dismay of the terrible tumult which would result from the arrest of these 6 men. "Where are your credentials?" Cavaignac bowed as if he recognized the justness of the question, felt in the pocket of his doublet, and took from a folded paper which he handed to Lennet with a low bow. Lennet opened and read it, and a joyful expression overspread his features, contracted a moment before by very natural apprehension. While Lennet was reading, Cavaignac cast a triumphant glance upon the assemblage. "Madam," said Lennet, stooping to whisper in the princess's ear, "see what unexpected good fortune! A paper signed in blank by Monsieur d'Epernon." "Monsieur," said the princess, with her most gracious smile, "thrice I thank you, for my husband, for myself, for my son." Surprise deprived all the spectators of the power of speech. "Monsieur," said Lennet, "this paper is so valuable that it cannot be your intention to give it into our hands unconditionally. This evening, after supper, we will talk together, if you please, and you can then tell me in what way we can be of service to you." With that, Lennet put the precious paper in his pocket, and Cavaignac had the requisite delicacy to abstain from asking him for it. "Well," said he to his companions, "did I not invite you to take supper with Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien?" "Now, to supper," said the princess. At the word, the folding doors were thrown open and disclosed a table spread with a sumptuous repast in the great gallery of the chateau. The feast was very animated and noisy. The health of Monsieur le Prince, proposed again and again, was drunk each time by all the guests on their knees, sword in hand, and uttering imprecations against Mazarin fierce enough to bring the walls down on their heads. Every one did honor to the good cheer of Chantilly. Even Ferguson, the prudent Ferguson, yielded to the charms of the vintage of Burgundy, with which he became acquainted for the first time. Ferguson was a Gascon, and had previously been in a position to appreciate no other wines than those of his own province, which he considered excellent, but which had achieved no great renown at that period, if the Duc de Saint-Simon is to be believed. But it was not so with Cavaignac. Cavaignac, while appreciating at their full worth the vintages of Moulin-Vent, Newts, and Chambern, was very moderate in his libations. He had not forgotten Lennett's cunning smile, and he thought that he needed all his faculties in order to make a bargain with the crafty counselor, which he would not have occasion to repent having made. He aroused the admiration of Ferguson, Barabbas, and the other three, who, failing to appreciate the reason of his temperance, were simple enough to think that he was beginning to reform. Toward the close of the banquet, as the toasts were becoming more frequent, the princess vanished, taking the Duc d'Enghien with her, and leaving her guests free to prolong the revelry as far into the night as they chose. Everything had taken place according to her wishes, and she gives a circumstantial narrative of the scene in the salon and the banquet in the gallery, omitting nothing save the words Lennett whispered in her ear as she rose from the table. "Do not forget, Your Highness, that we start at 10 o'clock. It was then close upon 9, and the princess began her preparations. Meanwhile, Lennett and Cavaignac exchanged glances. Lennett rose. Cavaignac did the same. Lennett left the gallery by a small door in a corner. Cavaignac understood the maneuver and followed him. Lennett led Cavaignac to his cabinet. The adventurer strode along behind with a careless, confident air, but his hand toyed negligently with the hilt of a long dagger thrust in his belt, and his keen, quick eye peered through half-open doors and scanned every fluttering curtain. He did not fear treachery precisely, but it was a matter of principle with him always to be prepared for it. Once in the cabinet, which was dimly lighted by a lamp, but was quite untenanted, as a swift glance showed him, Cavaignac took the seat to which Lennett waved him on one side of the table, whereon the lamp was burning. Lennett took his seat on the other side. "Monsieur," said Lennett, to win the adventurer's confidence at the outset, "in the first place, here is your signature in blank, which I return to you. It is yours, is it not?" "It belongs, monsieur," replied Cavaignac, "to him in whose possession it happens to be, for, as you see, it bears no other name than that of Monsieur le Duc d'Epernon. When I ask if it is yours, I mean to ask if it is in your possession with Monsieur le Duc d'Epernon's consent. I have it from his own hand, monsieur. It was neither stolen, then nor extorted from him by violence. I do not say by you, but by some other person from whom you received it. Perhaps you have it only at second hand. It was given me by the Duke himself, I tell you, voluntarily, in exchange for a paper which I handed him. Did you agree with Monsieur d'Epernon to use this signature of his for any particular purpose, and for no other? I made no agreement whatsoever with Monsieur d'Epernon. The person in whose hands it is may use it, then with perfect safety? He may. If that is so, why do you not make use of it yourself? Because if I keep it, I can use it for but one purpose, while by giving it to you, I can purchase two things with it. Were these two things? Money, first of all. We have almost none. I will be reasonable. And the second thing, a commission in the army of the princes. The princes have no army. They soon will have one. Would you not prefer a commission to raise a company? I was about to make that very suggestion to you. The question of the money is left for decision, then. Yes, the question of the money. What amount do you expect? 10,000 livres. I told you that I would be reasonable. 10,000 livres? Yes. You must surely advance me something toward arming and equipping my men. Indeed, it's not an exorbitant request. You agree, then? It's a bargain. Lennett produced commission all signed, inserted the names given him by the young man, affixed Madame la Princesse seal, and handed it to Cavaignac. He then opened a strong box which contained the treasure of the rebels, and took out 10,000 livres in gold pieces, which he arranged in piles of 20 each. Cavaignac counted them scrupulously one after another. When that task was completed, he nodded to Lennett to signify that the paper with Monsieur d'Epernon's signature was his. Lennett took it and placed it in the strong box, thinking, doubtless, that so precious a treasure could not be too carefully guarded. Just as he was placing the key of the chest in his pocket, a valet came running in, all aghast, to tell him that his presence was required on business of importance. Consequently, Lennett and Cavaignac left the cabinet. Leonard to follow the servant, Cavaignac to return to the banqueting hall. Meanwhile, Madame la Princesse was making her preparations for departure, which consisted in changing her party dress for an Amazonian costume, equally suitable for the carriage or the saddle, and assorting her papers so that she might burn those that were worthless and set aside the valuable ones to be taken with her. Lastly, in collecting her diamonds, which she had had removed from their settings, that they might occupy less space and be more easily available in case of an emergency. Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien was to travel in the suit he had wore at the hunt, as there had been no time to order another one made. His equerry, Violas, was to remain constantly at the carriage door, riding a white horse of the purest racing blood, so that he might take him upon a little saddle and gallop away with him, if need were. They were afraid at first that he would fall asleep and sent for Pierrot to come and play with him, but it was an unnecessary precaution. The proud satisfaction of being dressed as a man was quite enough to keep him awake. The carriages, which were ordered to be made ready as if to drive Madame la Vicomtesse de Cam's to Paris, were driven to a dark avenue of chestnuts, where it was impossible to see them, and were waiting there, doors open and coachmen in their places, within 20 paces of the main gate. They were all ready for the signal, which was to be given by a blast from the hunting horns. Madame la Princesse, with her eyes fixed upon the clock, which marked 5 minutes less than 10 o'clock, had already left her seat and was walking toward her son to take him by the hand, when the door was hastily thrown open, and Leonard burst into, rather than entered the room. Madame la Princesse, seeing his pale face and his anxious expression, lost color herself. "Oh, mon Dieu," said she, running to meet him. "What has happened? What is the matter?" "The matter is," Leonard replied in a voice choked with excitement, "that a gentleman has arrived and requests speech of you on behalf of the king." "Great God!" ejaculated the princess. "We are lost. Dear Leonard, what are we to do? There is but one thing to be done." "What is it?" "Undress Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien immediately and dress Pierrot in his clothes." "But I won't have you take off my clothes and give them to Pierrot," cried the young prince, ready to burst into tears at the mere thought, while Pierrot, in an ecstasy of joy, feared that he could not have heard aright. "We must do it, monseigneur," said Leonard, in the impressive tone which comes to one in emergencies, and which has the power of inspiring awe even in a child, "or else they will take you and your mamma this very moment to the same prison where your father is." The prince said no more, while Pierrot, on the other hand, was quite unable to control his feelings, and indulged in an indescribable explosion of joy and pride. They were both taken to a room on the ground floor near the chapel, where the metamorphosis was to take place. "Luckily," said Leonard, "the Princess Dowager is here. Otherwise we were surely outwitted by Mazarin." "How so?" "Because the messenger was in duty bound to begin by calling upon her, and he is in her antechamber at this moment. This messenger is a mere spy, of course, sent here from the court to watch us. Your Highness has said it. His orders, and are not to lose sight of us." "Yes, but what care you, if you are not the person he keeps in sight?" "I fail to understand you, Leonard." Leonard smiled. "I understand myself, madam, and I will answer for everything. Dress Pierrot as a prince, and the prince as a gardener, and I will undertake to teach Pierrot his lesson." "Oh, mon Dieu! Let my son go away alone." "Your son will go with his mother, madam." "Impossible." "Why so?" "If they find a false Duc d'Enghien here, they may well find a false Princesse de Condé." "Oh, splendid. Now I understand. Good Leonard. Dear Leonard. But who will represent me?" added the princess anxiously. "Have no fear on that score, madam," replied the imperturbable counselor. "The Princesse de Condé, whom I propose to make use of, and who I intend shall be kept in sight by Monsieur de Mazarin's spy, has just undressed in hot haste, and is getting into your bed at this moment. Let us go back for a moment, and see what had taken place prior to Leonard's conversation with the princess. While the guests were still sitting about the festive board, toasting the princes and cursing Mazarin, while Leonard was bargaining with Cavaignac in his cabinet for the possession of Monsieur d'Epernon's signature, and while Madame la Princesse was making her preparations for departure, a horseman made his appearance at the main gate of the chateau, followed by a servant, and rang the bell. The concierge opened the gate, but behind the concierge a newcomer found the halberdier whom we already know. "Whence come you?" he demanded. From Mantes, was the reply. So far all was well. Whither go you? The halberdier continued. To wait upon the Princess Dowager of Condé, then upon Madame la Princesse, and lastly upon Monsieur le Duc d'Enghien. You cannot enter, said the halberdier, barring the way with his halberd. By order of the king, rejoined the newcomer, taking a paper from his pocket. At these awe-inspiring words, the halberd was lowered. The sentinel called an usher. That official hurried to the spot, and His Majesty's messenger, having delivered the credentials, was immediately ushered into the chateau. Fortunately, it was a very extensive structure, and the apartments of the dowager were far removed from the gallery, where the last scene of the noisy festival we have described was still in progress. If the messenger had requested an interview with Madame la Princesse in the first place, the whole plan of escape would in truth have been thwarted. But etiquette demanded that he should first pay his respects to the elder princess. So the first valet de chambre ushered him into a large cabinet adjoining Her Highness's bedroom. Pray accept Her Highness's apologies, monsieur, said he. But Her Highness was taken suddenly ill day before yesterday, and was bled for the third time less than 2 hours since. I will make known your arrival to her, and I shall have the honor of ushering you into her presence in a moment. The gentleman bowed in token of acquiescence, and was left alone, entirely unaware that 3 curious pairs of eyes were observing his countenance through the keyhole and trying to recognize him. These 3 pairs of eyes belonged to Lennet, to Violas, the princess's equerry, and to Laurentière, captain of the hunt. In the event that either one of the 3 had recognized the gentleman, that one was to enter the room, and on the pretext of entertaining him while he waited, to divert his attention and thus gain time. But no one of the 3 was able to recognize the man whom they were so deeply interested in winning over to their cause. He was a well-favored youth in the uniform of an officer of infantry. He gazed about, with an indifferent air which might easily have been attributed to distaste for his errand, at the family portraits and the furniture of the cabinet, paying particular attention to the portrait of the dowager, to whom he was soon to be introduced, a portrait which was made when she was in the very flower of her youth and beauty. It was but a very few minutes before the valet de chambre returned, as he had promised, and conducted the messenger to the Princess Dowager's bedroom. Charlotte de Montmorency was sitting up in bed. Her physician, Bourdelot, was just leaving her bedside. He met the officer at the door and saluted him ceremoniously. The officer returned his salutation in the same manner. When the princess heard the visitor's footsteps and the few words he exchanged with the physician, she made a rapid sign with her hand in the direction of the passage beside the bed, whereupon the heavily fringed hangings, which enveloped the bed except on the side where they were drawn apart for the reception of her visitor, moved slightly for 2 or 3 seconds. In the passage were the younger princess and Lennet, who had entered by a secret door cut in the wainscoting, eager to ascertain the purport of the king's messenger's visit to Chantilly. The officer walked into the room, and halting a few feet from the door, bowed with a greater show of respect and etiquette absolutely demanded. The Princess Dowager's great black eyes were dilated with the superb expression of a queen about to give free rein to her wrath. Her silence was heavy with impending storms. With her white hand, made even whiter than usual by the bloodletting, she motioned to the messenger to deliver to her the letter of which he was the bearer. The officer extended his hand toward hers, and respectfully placed therein an of Austria's letter, then waited until the princess should have read the 4 lines it contained. "Very good," muttered the dowager, folding the paper with affected coolness. "I understand the queen's meaning, shrouded as it is in polite phrases. I am your prisoner." "Madam," the officer began in dire embarrassment. "A prisoner easy to guard, monsieur," continued Madame de Condé, "for I am in no condition to fly very far. And I have, as you must have seen as you came in, a stern keeper in the person of my physician, Monsieur Bourdelot." As she spoke, the dowager looked more attentively at the messenger, whose countenance was sufficiently prepossessing to soften somewhat the harsh reception due the bearer of such a communication. "I knew," she continued, "that Monsieur de Mazarin was capable of much unseemly violence. But I did not believe him to be so faint-hearted as to fear a sick old woman, a helpless widow, and an infant. For I presume that the order which you are the bearer applies to the princess my daughter and the duke my grandson, as well as to myself?" "Madam," returned the young man, "I should be in despair were your highness to judge me by the functions which I am unhappily compelled to perform." I arrived at Mantes bearing a message for the Queen. The postscript of the message recommended the messenger to Her Majesty. The Queen thereupon graciously bade me remain in attendance upon her, as she would in all probability have need of my services. 2 days later the Queen sent me hither, but while accepting, as in duty bound, the mission, whatever it might be, which Her Majesty deigned to entrust to me, I will venture to say that I did not solicit it, and furthermore that I would have refused it if kings were accustomed to brook a refusal. With that the officer bowed again, with no less respect than before. I augur well from your explanation, and, since you have given it, I have some hope that I may be permitted to be ill without being molested. But no false shame, monsieur. Tell me the truth at once. Shall I be watched even in my own apartments, as my poor son is at Vincennes? Shall I be allowed to write, and will my letters be opened or not? If, contrary to all appearance, I am ever able to leave my bed again, will my walks be restricted? Madam, replied the officer, these are the instructions which the Queen did me the honor to give me with her own mouth. Go, said Her Majesty, and assure my cousin of Conde that I will do whatever the welfare of the realm will permit me to do for the princes. In this letter I beg her to receive one of my officers, who will serve as intermediary between her and myself for such communications as she may wish to make to me. You will be that officer. Such, madam, added the young man, with renewed demonstrations of respect, were Her Majesty's own words. The princess listened to this recital with the careful attention of one seeking to detect in a diplomatic note the hidden meaning often depending upon the use of a certain word, or upon the placing a comma in a particular spot. After a moment's reflection, having discovered, doubtless, in the message the meaning that she had feared from the first to find therein, that is to say, espionage pure and simple, she said, pressing her lips together, you will take up your abode at Chantilly, monsieur, as the Queen desires. Furthermore, if you will say what apartment will be most agreeable to you, and most convenient for executing your commission, that apartment shall be yours. Madam, rejoined the officer with a slight frown, I have had the honor of explaining to your Highness many things not included in my instructions. Between your Highness's wrath and the Queen's command, I am in a dangerous position, being naught but a poor officer, and above all a wretched courtier. However, it seems to me that your Highness would be more generous to abstain from humiliating a man who is merely a passive instrument. It is distasteful to me, madam, to have to do what I am doing, but the Queen has so ordered, and it is for me to obey the Queen's commands to the letter. I did not seek the position. I should have been glad had it been given to another. It seems to me that that is much to say. And the officer raised his head with a blush which caused a similar blush to overspread the princess's haughty countenance. Monsieur, she replied, whatever our social station, we owe obedience to Her Majesty, as you have said. I will therefore follow the example set by you, and will obey as you obey. You must understand, however, how hard it is to be unable to receive a worthy gentleman like yourself without being at liberty to do the honors of one's house, as one would like. From this moment you are master here. Order, and you shall be obeyed. The officer bowed low as he replied, God forbid, madam, that I should forget the distance which separates me from your Highness, and the respect I owe to your illustrious family. Your Highness will continue to be mistress in your own house, and I will be the first of your servants. Thereupon the young gentleman withdrew, without embarrassment, without civility or arrogance, leaving the dowager a prey to anger, which was the more intense in that she found impossible to vent it upon one so discreet and respectful as a messenger. The result was that Mazarin was the theme that evening of a conversation, which would have struck the minister down if curses had the power to kill from a distance, like projectiles. The gentleman found in the antechamber the servant who announced him. Now, monsieur, said the latter, Madame la Princesse de Conde, with whom you have requested an audience on the Queen's behalf, consents to receive you. Be pleased to follow me. The officer understood that this form of speech served to spare the pride of the princess, and seemed as grateful for the honor bestowed upon him as if it were not made compulsory by the terms of his commission. He followed the valet through divers apartments until they reached the door of the princess's bedroom. There the valet turned about. Madame la Princesse, he said, retired upon returning from the hunt, and as she is greatly fatigued, she will receive you in bed. Whom shall I announce to her Highness? Announce Monsieur le Baron de Canoles on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen Regent, was the reply. At this name, which the pseudo-princess heard from her bed, she uttered a smothered exclamation which, had it been overheard, would sadly have compromised her identity, and hastily pulled her hair over her eyes with the right hand, while with the left she pulled the rich coverlet of her bed well over her face. "Admit the gentleman," she said, in a disguised voice. The officer stepped inside the door,